check Twitter, make sure we're live. Looks like we're back for another episode of the Proof of Beauty podcast, episode number 18. We're just chatting about a contract that was unveiled yesterday night by Leonidas on Twitter. We're going to pull this up on our screen here so that you guys can see what we're talking about. But quite simply, the oldest NFT on Ethereum seems to have been rediscovered, and it seems to be some sort of a domain name minting platform. Outside of that, it doesn't really have a name yet. And the actual, I don't know if you could even call them domains yet, but domains don't really have a utility yet. But I think the community is just kind of waiting to see what happens. One sec here. I'm going to send you a link, Dave, in case you haven't seen it. I just sent you the link on Discord so you can pull it up. For whatever reason, it's not letting me share my screen right now, guys. Ash, did you want to see if you can share it on your screen?
Yeah, let me give it a go right now.
Is this the thing that Laszlo minted, right? Because he was minting something about domain history with hash. I'm assuming now it's this specifically.
Let's see. Ash, you're gonna have to walk through it. I just realized because it's on your screen.
Yeah, so I'm just looking. I'm also learning about this right now. So it sounds to me from this, basically, Leonidas found the oldest NFT contract, and it was probably just an app that lets you register any domain name, and it was not really. It probably didn't even check against existing domains, right?
It did, but what was a little funny about it is like it was cap sensitive, and so like you could mint, Ash, and then I could mint capital A Ash, and then I could mint capital A S Ash and capital A S H Ash. You know what I mean? Like,
okay.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's some things about it that are a little weird, and I kind of wonder what, like, if people actually decided to use that, what that would actually look like with it actually being case sensitive.
Who's Mason? Who's that?
I believe that's the guy who actually found it. I could be mistaken, but there, as I was mentioning to Ash, Dave, I believe the individual made like some sort of a bot or AI or something to basically scope out this contract, found the contract, put it in one of the historical archaeological.
The UI is made by Mason.
Right. Yeah. He's making a wrapper too, actually. And so within like 24 hours, we should see a wrapper probably for his domains.
So somebody, you're saying, kind of like sifted every transaction, every block, every address, I guess, just fuzz testing token-like function calls, and I think somehow, I guess, discovered that this is an NFT to an extent, and well, that's like great,
Right.
This is the very first contract, really.
I mean, I would probably say that you guys could verify that a lot better than I could. What
did you say, Ash?
So I'm looking at the website, saying within the Ethereum community, Lineage is a legend and somewhat of an enigma. Not only did they deploy first, so they're calling this person Lineage, I guess.
Let's take a look at what this Lineage
contract. This transaction details.
Mm-hmm.
Who is this guy?
Funny enough, I think, the original Terra Nullius, if I recall correctly from yesterday's Twitter space, I think the guy who created this actually minted like the second Terra Nullius that was ever made. So he was definitely an active dev in that time where those projects were coming up.
First shared a contract on Reddit. Oh, name register. Okay.
Yeah, so this is where people came about it.
That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You can date it based on the fact that it uses WebJS instead of users.
Right.
Okay, so it is a registrar system in the same way as ENS, as you can use it to pay people. So nice. Okay. And then that's cool. That's pretty cool that this sudden took off.
Right. Well, you never know what's going to become of these things. Right now, it really doesn't seem to have any actual value, but people could decide to try to make it something, even if it's just like a niche community that tries to build on it. So last night, yeah, like a proper degen, I minted a healthy bunch. And you guys, it's so funny because what I actually do is I have these lists that I've used on other domain sites where it's like the most valuable domains to buy in said categories, right? So I'll go through those categories and I'll just look for the most valuable domains based on history, and try to buy those up. And like, because it was so new, so few of them were actually minted. And so if this becomes something, maybe that will be really nice. But if it did, I still have the hard time wondering what would actually become of it. What do you guys think about the idea that basically, well, maybe I'm wrong, but is there even a way for this to be connected to your ETH address?
Yeah, I think that's the purpose of it, right? It's like if you own one of these domains and you use that app, then you can pay someone by looking up their name, getting the address, and whatnot. But so actually, the question that's in my mind right now, Dave, is like, does it make so if you're a collector caring about historic artifacts or like just historic things, and you wanted to have some like would you rather own a piece of one of these NFTs, or would you want like a hash of the TX of the contract? I mean, both have their own place,
Right.
but I'm just thinking like one is more obviously some kind of NFT from the contract itself is interesting, but there's so many of them that it itself is not valuable, right? That valuable each piece.
That's a good question. I think that's something we can all kind of muse on.
Yeah.
It's like I'm like thinking of it in like a how do we capture like war, conflicts? I think
Yes.
at an individual level, families put a lot of weight to maybe a heirloom from a conflict, a metal, maybe a tool. But I think for folks maybe generations that past that don't have a personal collection, I think of the Vietnam War because I don't have any family related to that through war photography, right? And that's my connection to it. But then war photography sounds more like hash, right? It's like you took a camera to capture it. It's not something that was, of that conflict beyond just you documenting it, right? Where I think owning like a heirloom NFT does have its place. But I just think they just kind of reach different ways towards audiences. Now, I think what is really interesting, where this kind of breaks down to metaphor, and I think that's where things get really cool, is, as I assume with this with this old registrar, there is no. It's not as if it's shut off, right? Like it's not like I can't create a new heirloom during the Vietnam War because that's the past, right? Like I what's left of the scarce heirloom experiences of the Vietnam War is what we got now, right? And we're losing them day by day as it's getting again. But like this weird thing where it's like, well, the registrar is as much as in the past as it is in the present, as in you can experience what it was, the same experience as it was. What is it, 7 years ago? So I find that really interesting, and that's something that I don't know. I feel like there's so many ways you can reinterpret that idea, and how do you relate to it? But
yeah, because I guess like from a museum, so a museum context, which one would you actually have? You wouldn't have. I mean, you would maybe have a photograph, like a hash, basically of the contract creation TX, but having various important like heirlooms of like I don't know, like if someone had like Vitalik.eth or something like that, registered name, like, stuff like that, then you would have those kind of like big heirlooms in the museum, and the hash, the photograph would kind of take a back seat. And so I
think there is like an inflection point, right? Like if I think of like say ancient civilizations and their cultural artifacts that we have left, I feel like some of them, to an extent, maybe I'm more closely referring to like say Chinese pottery or Asian pottery and the porcelain. It's like somebody had to
Mhm.
use like some of those are like pretty personal heirlooms, but like for me, I'm
Yes.
looking at it in a museum between plexiglass. It's like it means nothing to me beyond just that's a beautiful artisanal piece, right? And a
Mhm.
reflection of its age and its time. But maybe it meant a lot something more. It was maybe a heirloom to somebody, right? There's like a weird point where it's so lost to history
Yeah.
that it just kind of becomes a much more of a pragmatic representation of its time, um,
Right.
which I find interesting in the context that it feels like it's a reflection of how time works, where as you leave beyond this cultural moment, these things lose their cultural meaning and become more pragmatic. But in crypto,
Mhm.
that when things have such a well, for one, crypto is so freaking short, right? Like we're still talking within the one generation of
Right.
people, right? But two, if it is what it is, there's a lot of things that just won't shut down, right? Like they're
Mm.
not designed to
Well,
shut down, predicated that
part of
blockchain doesn't.
the question also is what exactly is everyone's goal or interest in this? Like, I think half of it is that this is actually very interesting. The
Mhm.
fact that it's just a contract discovered in this manner with these attributes, of being the first and also being a name service.
Yeah.
There's no reason for build on top of it, to be honest, right? I mean, there's no like actual reason, and it doesn't really make sense. People kind of just want something to ape into, but the topic and the event itself is still interesting,
Right.
and could captured via like something like hash, right?
One of the
Which I
things.
believe
just
Laszlo already did then.
Right.
okay.
One of the things I find interesting about the name system there is that there's actually 60, I believe it was 60, you could probably verify in the contract, 60 NFTs that were minted like originally when that project came out. So like with respect to it being an heirloom, like those original 60 would obviously be the most valuable heirlooms, truest to the heart of the moment that which that was created, right? Otherwise, everything else just kind of resembles almost like a camera, like you were saying, like you weren't there in the moment, but you can capture a piece of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but I do wonder what kind of utility could be created out of this. I mean, ENS, I mean, like, to be honest, like it actually looks really rudimentary now that you see this. This was made like 7 years ago, and ENS was made like 2 years ago, right? And it doesn't seem to be that much further ahead. So I do
I think
wonder if they were to do something with it.
ENS was one of the
Oh,
first
you're right. It
NFTs.
was older. You're right. Yes, you're right. Like
Yeah, it was like 2
2017 or
years ago.
something.
It's like calculating in my head. It's like, what is 2 years ago?
No, it's
2020.
time's just flying. Like I feel like I'm still in 2020. But yeah, no, I'm just thinking like first thing I saw it and I started using it, I thought, I wonder, how much more ENS is actually advanced compared to this. Like there's going to
Probably a
be
lot more, right?
Yeah.
Like that probably has expiration and stuff like that. This is probably just
Yeah.
a pretty rudimentary mapping of.
You're right. This doesn't have
I
expiration.
think there's a better economic model around ENS.
Mm-hmm.
Better is in a lot of quotes here. But I mean, like, call me jaded. What is there to really innovate in that space beyond like economic design?
I hear you.
Right, it's about biz dev, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Get enough wallets to support it.
Probably a prototype, right? I mean, that's what it made it sound like on Reddit.
Yeah.
And so if it's a prototype, like,
well, this was a 2015 era, so that's like everything was a prototype. Like,
yeah, everything was a prototype, right? So then, but the question is, why make utility? I guess off of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think
there may not be a reason.
Would be a reflection that there is capital that's willing to exercise, but like, they didn't raise. I don't know who's going to raise a token, ICO, whatever. If they want to raise capital, is there a venture cap that wants to make this? There's already Unstoppable. There's ENS, right? But I wonder. I wonder if it's interesting to say if say, as you kind of said, there was 60 that was minted before its discovery or whatever. If say OpenSea or secondary marketplaces would open 2 marketplaces for it. One is the Heirlooms 60, and then the rest that are not the original 60 gets into another floor price, and another market captured. Right, like at that point, you're not segregating upon an attribute. You're not segregating on like, oh, this is a purple background or whatever. You're segregating on time, which not a lot of. I don't think there's a single marketplace that really does that.
Just one
that
project.
Means it's not, like OpenSea should support like finer detail floor price, right? Because a singular floor price is going to rapidly not make sense for most a lot of collections.
I would argue, right, the floor price is actually more of an inhibitor of creativity when you reductively reduce a whole collection's value down to the cheapest NFTs perceived sell liquidity, exit liquidity price, right? It gives you it's a good way to discover an index into the performance of a thing, but like, man, it's so reductive. It's so reductive, right?
And there's a few projects like this too, where the time that which certain NFTs in the collection were minted does in fact matter. Like the time that the first 60 were minted does matter. One of the biggest issues with Terra Nullius V2 when that came out, that wrapper, was that only, and I may be mistaken on the number, but about only 4,000 tokens were actually the original like Terra Nullius V1. Everything else, which could be minted perpetually, was a V2 and a wrapped modern version, but didn't actually have any historical significance to that very first Terra Nullius project, right? And so what happened when it first came out, everybody thought, oh, Terra Nullius is the first NFT. The price pumped, and then people realized, oh, only a couple thousand of these are the first NFT, and the floor absolutely cratered, right?
The arbitrage would. Yeah.
Right. I kind of see it a similar way, like that it could go down a similar way.
Yeah, I mean, like I feel like in part we as consumers of NFTs would probably have to reconceptualize what is a collection. And that's something that I felt very strongly that we have to kind of pull out from even the traditional art world. Like what segregates stuff into like this is a group of art, like this is a group of culture, right? Like you can say albums is a categorical collection, and there's other ways to measure it. And when I was younger, I've done a lot of block printing. Which is you use like a relief cut of like a wood or of like a resin thing, and you put ink on it, you press it down on paper. So there's like a really weird, interesting reflection where if I take the same block and I print 100 of them, technically they should all be one collection, right? But then say I made 4 blocks that fit into, say, a same thematic like experience, and are these all of one collection? Now, what if I took 5 of the best prints from each block and put them all together in a collage? That's a new collection, right? But in such a way.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
It's like, I just feel like a NFT equals collection is just not a particularly creative expression of.
Wouldn't that be like rather limiting too? Like if we're to consider like, say, real world use cases of NFTs, like for example, like say a land title, or like, I don't know, like an insurance policy that you have that you show ownership of as an NFT. Your collection of policies wouldn't make too much sense, or here's a collection of land titles, you know? So I think that what will probably happen, my guess anyways, as this, concept matures, I'm sure we'll create new verbiage to like actually describe the action that's happening within that collection, or if it has utility, what you're doing with it. It will probably have wouldn't you think we'd be given names to these things?
Yeah, there's like there's already that category where you like, I think like Foundation and Rarible kind of has it, whereas like you mint your one of one within their contract. right? So it's like it's a one of one, but it exists within a singular contract. So if you were to go on OpenSea, they all look like they're all part of one, but really they're like you don't price them, you don't value them, you don't see them, their story as with which other one of ones that's been minted, because it saves money to mint on somebody else's contract and not your own.
Right.
To an extent, I feel like we're in like the NFT because we're in the bear. We're in like we have one AMM where we just have like the linear invariant for Uniswap. Where I think as we start discovering categorically what NFTs are specializing in, we're going to start to see in similar ways how we see like stablecoin driven AMMs. We'll see like, oh, this NFT marketplace is just specifically catered towards a quality of NFTs that many other platforms don't quite want to support right now.
Right.
And I think there's probably opportunity there, but right now I wouldn't say there's a lot of collections that it's worth spending a 5-man woman team to build something yet. But I think it will come eventually.
I just had a random thought I'd love to kind of pick your brains on. We're thinking about like marketplaces selectively choosing which NFTs they want to have on their marketplace, right? And it got me thinking about how like people are already kind of thinking this way in context of like, what Bitcoin am I going to mine? Is it going to be green? You know, like this kind of thing. And I wonder if there's going to be marketplaces that just sell quote unquote green NFTs. You know what I mean? And
like,
if there's going to
like NFTs that provenance is on a non-energy consumptive network.
Sure. Yeah. Or for example, is carbon offset, or maybe it was minted on a platform that is carbon offset, or you know, many other things like that. But I wonder if that's going to be
if the e-commerce world has anything to tell by, it will happen just in time. Right now, I feel like everybody's. If I were to read any like go-to-market strategy written by a PM at a marketplace team, they pretty much, I feel like right now the standing strategy is do whatever you can to shotgun away liquidity from OpenSea. Right?
Okay.
Right? Like,
yeah.
We're not at a point where a Shopify-like experience exists and makes sense. That's what Super Rare was until they pivoted into what is now Super Rare. It just doesn't quite work right now when we don't really have quite an understanding of what an NFT can really be, more than just, I think, what people are saying right now, which is just like a digital brand identifier.
Right.
Which pretty much means the bigger the better, being what PFPs are.
Right.
But yeah, there's quite a bit of just, I think it's like chicken and egg problems. Like, which one is more important to me? Do you think we just need to flesh out more what can an NFT do, expressively speaking? We think the formula is there, and that should naturally create different market tooling. Because if they're all going to be PFPs, I'd be hard pressed if you could somehow find money sustainably to create a green only NFT marketplace. Maybe the next bull market brings in enough mainstream people that is willing to support it.
What Expo?
I actually know of one. Let me check. I think
there's one that I know that is only on Polygon, and they pitch themselves as a green energy NFT issuance marketplace platform.
There's one on Energy Web as well being built out. Let's see here.
But yeah, like it's, I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting.
I think people are greedy right now. you do what you need to do to get the money that you need to do to do what you need to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like right now, though, I think people are greedy, period. You know, like one thing I've learned in this market is people are greedy, and half of the problems we have are related to greed. More than half of probably like a healthy, like 85% of the problems are actually related to greed.
I feel like if you were to ask most teams, especially NFT teams, you know, like, what are you spending your time working on? technically
Right.
speaking. Like, well, we're trying to distribute our NFT in a way that is not solely driven by singular actor greed, right?
Right.
And I was like, man, it's like we're spending so much freaking time just trying to solve that problem. How are we gonna have any more resources to do crazier, cooler, funner stuff with NFTs when we're all stuck on just trying to distribute it in a way
Right.
that is honest or reflective? And we're already seeing that with some of the ERC20 airdrops, right? Like with Safe,
Mhm.
like it's non-transferable right now. There's
Right.
been quite a few airdrop experiences. They're like, yeah, we are going to sandbag the living hell out of you guys to make this as much of a not a exit liquidity experience that like what like ApeCoin kind of felt like.
Right.
Like a lot of people just like, oh crap, I have $150,000 of ApeCoin. Let me just
Right.
put a down payment for a new house or whatever, right?
I always think about the way you put it once. You said, let's keep money out of the hands of 14-year-olds. And I'm like, your words. And I think about that when we think about creating, projects that are like responsible and not just going to be used by people to try to make money. And I mean, like you said, that problem seems pretty difficult to solve in a market where pretty much the whole market thrives off of greed and wanting to make money.
Well, it's like in crypto, it's like things need to have an incentive or they're not crypto.
Right.
Without a financial incentive, they're not crypto, right?
If there's no utility or whatever.
Right. And it is a thing that I personally sometimes get frustrated or will have to reconcile with is if we're using the medium, the NFT, as a very art medium, there's decisions we make mechanically that don't abide to the whole utility drama of crypto. And I think there's some folks that looks at it from us and is like, hey, where's the utility narrative? I'm like, well, it's like again, I keep on bringing this quote back up in my head. It's like if you're a hammer, everything's a nail, right? In crypto, everybody's like, where's the arbitrage opportunity, right? And maybe the bear market will start to change that as some folks have different reasons to stay here. But it's something that I've been in times very frustrated with, where we are not technically challenged. We are actually just, market challenged to not be able to create a lot of things because we would release them in a way that people won't really be willing to appreciate at this time. And it's, as a creator who spends a lot of hours building these things, it's like, well, it sucks if people are not just not appreciating, they're shitting on it because it doesn't sit well in their arbitrage narrative. And yeah, so there's rant over. I don't want to go too further into this without being sounding like I'm stuck up here. But
I mean, this is something we've known for a long time, right? Obviously, it's like, and that's fundamentally in collision with, I would say, the entire NFT space, right? It's like, because they're saying one thing and doing another thing ultimately, right? Everybody's saying that it's about community and it's about the art, it's about this.
It's about the art.
Yeah. So I think so then when I think about the problem, it's like, how do we attack that problem? One is like, no number of visuals or no number of fancy visuals is gonna help you solve that, right? You're still gonna run. It's gonna be a people trading stuff like Fidenza type of situation, right? No number of visuals is gonna work. All the fancy whitelist tokens is not gonna work. Like all that stuff. So you need to whatever project you create has to be I think fundamentally different from everything else, and that people get invested into it, like the way you get invested into a video games universe, and not like and doesn't have to be even stream necessarily a live service lore like We Are All Gonna Die. I think that made some progress, and even stuff like terraforms won't work, I think, too. You know, that was like a bull market type thing. It's like I think whatever project you drop has to challenge the user to some degree, and have some like poeticness beyond just like the gen art and like trading and stuff like that, like or like rarity mechanisms.
Right.
It can't just be pure rarity mechanisms.
I do subscribe to the idea that the next bull market, we don't know the answer. How do we get there yet? I think
We don't really
right
know.
now forcefully manifesting ideas. This is like
I wonder if we'll even get there. Like if a lot of these projects will even make it. And sorry, Ash, I'll let you finish your thought. But I was just thinking, like, I wonder if this is akin to the .com boom, where a lot of these quote unquote projects were almost like the stocks that were highly inflated during that period. But go ahead, Ash. Go ahead.
I think it is pretty much like that, right? But like after the .com boom, it's not like websites went out of fashion, right? It's like people were still making weird websites.
But it was
You're
like
right.
reimagining of what is a website, in my opinion. It was like, what is your relationship
and the value of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Like to an extent,
free.
I think who survived the .com? I'm a little young for this.
Right.
Amazon to an extent, and right afterwards, not part of that boom, but a lot of the modern tech industry that we see today, I feel like they had to the one that did survive, in my opinion, just like they had enough grit and open-mindedness that they're willing to take their business model, whatever it was, and re-manifest it in a way that is actually a reflection of the modernity of like how we think of websites now. Like I think everything that kind of still stuck in the .com like thought process probably all died, but the things that by luck or by wit or by sheer freaking brilliance was able to survive, I think they aren't what they were, right? Like there was the .com version of that company, and there's the whatever we interpret it maybe now, right? And I think with our NFT world, I think that we'll see that kind of sink and swim kind of movement, where I think which projects I won't give them like the blessing that you guys are smarter than anybody else, but just by luck, wit, or brilliance, you guys figured out a new way to reimagine your business strategy and implement it and execute it with violence that can survive into the sustained NFT bull / growth market. Now, I think a good prerequisite of that is you need money. You need money to keep enough motivated people around. And unfortunately or fortunately, that usually gives you cadence to the biggest projects, cadence to the projects that have venture capital money, that have.
I mean, I see. Yeah, my hope at least is that like the same way after the 90s and the collapse of like a lot of the let's say the .com boom, right? And then maybe like early 2000s, a bunch of like that was a Matrix era. When did Matrix come out? Like 1998,
99 or 2000,
something like that. It's before 2000 for sure. So I think like in early 2000s, people like there was MySpace era, and a lot of users were making free. They're just putting content online, right? That's the kind of phase. Hopefully, that is the kind of phase NFTs run into, where there's a bunch of like weird, abstract and personal content related. That's the kind of style of projects I want to see, basically.
Well,
and I think those.
This is where I feel like the internet bubble thing breaks down as our strict comparative tool. There's a lot of things that rhymes, but the key thing that in my heart I have a hard time rhyming is before the .com bubble, there was nothing to compare it against, in my opinion, when it comes to some massive aggregation of
there's lots of examples.
There's a lot of examples. I don't feel like there's one where like you can literally be within one generation and be able to experience what it was before, and then the upward climb. And we are in a position that we can say, yeah, like the people that made money in the .com bubble, they're like freaking VCs pumping money in.
Right.
Into our world now. Now I'm not old enough or historically accurately knowledgeable enough to know that before the .com bubble, I assume it mostly was Silicon money that was driving the internet revolution, right?
Mhm.
So maybe
Mhm.
there were people, maybe they were experiencing like, oh, if the Silicon Revolution could do it, the internet
Mhm.
bubble will happen, right? Or are we saying that same like how much is there to rhyme, and like how much do we just have to know that like what's the future
Right.
is the future? Like there's some general like game theoretic movements of how markets work,
I
and I
mean,
think that like
there's some
there's
key
rhyming.
things. I'm not even looking at the market or necessarily the historic, like what happened before and after, right? I'm just looking at the components of like
Mhm.
the internet bubble, .com bubble was largely dependent on the flaw that companies thought users were more sophisticated or more engaged than they actually were, right? Because of the stock price. People were more interested in the stock price going up than what users were actually doing on these websites, right? Like I'm talking about things like what was the classic
Mhm.
example of like it's like
Pets.com,
pet
man.
food, yeah,
Yeah.
like pet delivery, like food delivery shit, or like stuff, all that
It
kind
was
of
like an
shit, right?
early
Like no,
Amazon model, right?
yeah, basically, right? But they knew like
But like,
they just overestimated the
well then like
user.
it's like yeah, I guess that does rhyme a lot because aren't we seeing that with hard tech right now? Like
Mhm.
the amount of smart cars, electric cars that like have
No, I'm
like
talking about
overblowing stocks as
comparing that.
well.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm just comparing that directly to NFTs, right? People are not actually doing anything with the tokens; they're just trading them, which is basically the stock price, right?
Isn't
And then
that
as soon as that, like, yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I was just adding to your thought. I was just thinking, isn't that kind of comparable to the dot-com boom where people weren't really using websites a whole lot yet? They were just kind of
Yeah,
trading them,
exactly.
Sure.
right? And
Yeah,
so websites crash, the technology moves forward and becomes refined based on whoever the winners were that succeeded the crash.
but there's a
Um,
really large period of free content, right? It's like we had to like.
yeah,
I think people forget how like that was a large in the early 2000s. A long time, people thought how is any company, any online company, going to make money except hard businesses like Amazon and whatnot, right?
right,
Any online
Mm.
business, there's no real true concept of how you would make money. So yeah, you could get by in ads, but that's
right,
gonna
right.
drive that well fast, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
a depleting resource. And so especially when Facebook was getting investment, they definitely did not know what the fuck was how to make money, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for a long time. And nobody thought they were going to be profitable by the time they reached $1 billion. There was still a huge doubt. So like that's what basically the point is. And say like there's still a lot of free culture. Like the internet went through that phase of that freeness, right?
Hmm.
Of people just publishing and putting things out and like weird shit going on. I think like Cicada
Yeah,
3301 is a great example, right? Of like people just doing things. Um,
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
Mm.
I feel like there's so much you can dive in around this too. Like, um, yeah, I guess I have a thought that I'm just kind of leave off for now, but I'm just, uh, yeah, I feel like you're right, Ash, and there are a lot of things that don't necessarily rhyme. I think one of the biggest distinguishments that was made though was I think what do you say, Dave, that there's nothing to compare to prior. Um, in
But then
this
I
case,
thought about it. There was a
yeah,
Silicon movement,
there was the Silicon movement. I
which which
yeah,
christened the name of Silicon Valley, right?
right. Wouldn't this just be like the distinguishment here would just be the technology factor then? Like which technology is being
I
used in these?
think technology and the venture capital world that we live in
it's the
is
engagement. It's
pretty
the
Hmm.
wild
relationship
now.
between the
Hmm.
creators and the user. I think that's the key thing to look at the relationship between the creators and the users,
There's
right? Like
really no users in the NFT market though, compared to say software, right? And so
yeah,
like even early on, like there's still very few users, and so I'm like, is that it? Because a lot of these people are putting a lot of money into projects with no users, hoping to capture a user
yeah.
base.
I mean, I'm just
Well,
saying
that's the
like
part
to
I don't
example.
think that rhymes with the dot-com bubble is we are
Okay,
working
yeah.
within a very sophisticated venture capital market
Mm,
that I do think is, for one, a few degrees more sophisticated than what it was.
mm-hmm,
But two, the willingness to spend their money on non-traditional returns,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
which
Yeah.
that's the only X factor. But again, gravity brings things to the ground. Generally speaking, money
Mm-hmm.
and markets, as Ash implied, they have movements that are very predictable. And
Yes.
we are in a place where I don't think anybody has a clue what is the answer to get to that that growth
Right.
phase right now. I think right now, but that lends beautifully to an era of the NFT movement where we're just figuring stuff out, and it just becomes fun. It just becomes less about how do you raise 40 million and do something and exit. It's just about what can we do and have some fun along the way doing it.
I think they're not necessarily even that. I don't see them, especially in crypto, necessarily that more sophisticated than what they were doing back in the past. Maybe they have more lessons, more tooling, more data. But what their actions
10 years ago, you're gonna invest in an asset that doesn't give you securities returns on an SPAC. Well, for one, SPACs didn't really meaningfully exist back then.
Right.
There's only like an IPO or an acquisition, right?
And they've gotten their asses kicked too. A lot of SPACs have failed.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah.
It's like financial instrumentation has gotten a lot more sophisticated to the point where VCs had to get more sophisticated along with it. It's like I don't know how to measure how much of this difference makes the rhyming not worth rhyming anymore, right? Like it's
right.
I mean, I think it's very similar. It seems to me if I take a step back, we're still very similar to what's happened in the past. Of like, you had the .com boom, and then we had to go through the MySpace era to get to the Facebook. The Facebook era is what we still basically are in now, right?
I think we're even earlier than the Facebook era.
We're
just like
NFTs,
right at that cusp, maybe. But
I'm not talking about crypto. I'm talking about in real life, right? The rest of the world. We're still in we're in that time period of things. Like Facebook changed everything, right? In terms of the social media paradigm of money and dominance, their level of dominance in the field. I'm not saying Facebook is a dominant player, but they were the first to start that wave. And so we're still in that era of
So
you see them,
If we were to like zoom back, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the key characteristics of the MySpace era was that it was hugely dependent on like custom abstract content from users. They're creating pages for other people, for themselves. They're doing a bunch of things like from my understanding, it was very, very custom, more so than any other type of experience we have today. The landing page, all that stuff, right? Because I'm pretty sure you could upload like PHP code or something, right?
Sure.
Something like that.
So,
yeah. You see where I'm getting at basically here, right? It's like the level of creativity and blank canvassing at that time was pretty huge, and it opened up. And it was not just MySpace. I'm talking about like all the, and because people were experimenting, they were getting into website development via MySpace. They're also experimenting with their own like custom sites, like putting wacky shit up and trying all kinds of weird things, right? And so that was a chunk of time that I think is very distinct and not necessarily like talked about that much. And then we're pretty much completely lost at. Nobody goes to normal websites for the most part.
But Shopify has made a huge boon on not custom websites.
That's e-commerce.
I would say
normal non-e-commerce websites, right?
Yeah, but like they're not like you going on Amazon. They're not going on a standardized set of things. It's sure the checkout flow is standardized, but each one of them have their own brand, right? Like the no-code movement is a very strong movement right now.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, but that's what e-commerce. We're talking about again businesses. I'm talking about non-business content, right?
So, blogs.
Yeah. Who's
well,
really
right now that we replaced that with content creators, right? On a standardized platform.
Standardized platforms, right? Back in the day, people were just spinning up websites and hosting them where the fuck. So that's what I'm talking about, right? The fragmentation, the abstractness at that time is highly distinct compared to now. And then the NFT world, or really all of
you guys remember when like the iOS, when the app movement was a thing where everybody made an app? Now it's like I don't remember the last time I downloaded a new app that like that was recommended to me. It wasn't like crap. I need to download a smart home app that I don't app. Right? Like I haven't just
all the apps are largely.
Like, I remember seeing that movement too, and just kind of like almost like I feel like this is giving myself too much credit, but almost like seeing through it. Thinking like there's not going to be an app for everything. Like this couldn't possibly work.
So I wasn't smart enough to see through it. I became a Swift developer, and that was my first like foray into development was because of that movement. I was part of that era.
Right.
But anyways, you can't ask me to make an iOS app anymore because I don't do that further.
Right.
Haven't done that in half a decade.
I learned Objective C way back, so
Yeah,
I get it. But I wanted to bring zoom out a little bit on this whole conversation and just think a little bit about the macro. Like, wouldn't the entire scenario that we're experiencing, this crash of the market, look very different if we didn't have so many macroeconomic influences? Like, obviously, we've got historic printing of money. We've got like absurd lending that went on perpetually, and basically just inflated the market. You've got assets backed by piss poor debt. You've got all kinds of issues happening today that results in a market crash, which affects this particular market. I wonder what the market we're experiencing would look like had we not had, a war with Russia or a COVID-19 lockdown or a or other macroeconomic influences that would lock the economy up, basically. And I probably just got our video on some kind of a list or something. But no, for real though, do you see what I'm getting at, right? Like, compared to the .com crash, there are quite a few dramatic macroeconomic influences right now that would also seem, in many ways, what's the over no, I wouldn't want to say in a way that might be misconstrued, that would be blown up because of our media outlets and because of the way we communicate on social media. Like, every issue seems gigantic, and now you have all these gigantic issues happening all at once, creating massive influence that really didn't seem to exist in 2000, especially because the internet wasn't where it is, right? But anyway, it's just a thought. What do you guys think?
I don't know. Hard to say. I mean,
Right.
that's like an omniscient kind of question.
True.
It's a little hard to say right now. Yes, we lost a lot of consumer capital, but by the miracle and the god and the pantheon that is A16Z and those freaking cryptos funds, enough projects right now are being propped up by.
Yeah.
I guess.
I think it was inevitable. It almost feels outside of macro events, to be honest, right? The NFT stuff. It's like everything's timed together for the most part, but
it's all connected to liquidity, right? And liquidity markets are deeply tied to macro.
It's to an extent, it's when we had our kind of bubble crack with Luna and everything, it's that market felt very overheated. It was we were literally just recycling the same formula of airdropping something. Either be it an NFT or a DeFi protocol, and it just wasn't a reflection of new ideas anymore. And we were all complaining about the same thing, but there was so much money that was drowning us that the complaints didn't really validate in any way.
I mean, we probably are seeing a lot of new the fact that these patterns are so long lasting, the fact that these things keep working, right? To someone like me, as someone somewhat removed from the DeFi scene, these types of things keep happening. It doesn't really make sense. I wouldn't participate, right? But I guess because everybody has a different Twitter and a different TikTok, and they all have their own feedback loop, they're able to. It keeps working. You can keep doing an airdrop as a new project and then reach a new audience. It keeps working. But in the past, maybe there wouldn't have been so many repeat hits, stuff like that. Because maybe the funnel of information is slightly more streamlined, more centralized.
Yeah, also, you couldn't legally do an airdrop before.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going to do a securities drop or
yeah, that'd be rough.
What,
yeah.
I guess you're going to
drop, shoes or luxury goods.
Yeah, I'm talking about anything else, like sneaker, let's just say anything else where someone has to react quickly or for some financial incentive, right? Yeah, but
I mean, I feel as Bitwizard can imply, I do feel the macroeconomic situation during the COVID printing and the very loose macroeconomic interpretation of how do we sustain a market during a moment of shock to industries. I think it made a very overheated fiat market where there's just a lot of money that just wanted to be anywhere that's not fiat.
Yeah, wanted to be parked, right?
Yeah, and I think, you know, it created that flywheel where it's like, oh, if I might, it's like it was probably started with like, oh, 3% is good every year, and I was like, no, actually 5% is now the new 3, and then it becomes the new 15% is now the new 5, and then you add that to like with Robinhood and all these low market cap trading things, and then you have a like a other thing where you have like social media hustlers trying to do their thing. Man, it's like a very what are you doing if you're not making money kind of market.
Right. Right.
But yeah, Ashley, if you need to hop off, you can feel free to hop off. Bitwizard and I, we can hold the fort for a little longer.
No problem.
Yeah, that's okay.
Muse and
I have a
chat.
little bit of coffee, but I'll just hang out for a bit.
Yeah, just take it easy. I mean, yeah. You were saying though, dude?
Yeah, it's just like I don't know. The real world is pretty overheated when it comes to capital deployment. People were chasing pretty unrealistic yields, but I think it's a reflection of how much money was printed, and the debt that certain sovereignties have undertook to support that narrative.
Yeah.
It's pretty much like
Do you think also the fact that it's not necessarily denominated in USD makes the cyclic pattern, or in DeFi for yields farming, right? Like way more juicy. It's like gaming basically. These are literally like it's very gamey in that aspect, right?
Don't most people still price out and track their shit in USD though? Like we say it's not in USD, but people.
I think for the small cap, yes, but like
okay,
I can speak from experience. I don't price my gas transactions in dollar anymore. I price them in ETH because to me, I think ETH has stronger value than I think dollars are just perceived paper value dependent to how the energy dollar ratio is.
It's a huge signal change in your brain for you to say it costs 1 ETH versus it cost $1,300 if you saw that sticker price, right? Big signal change. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, one is who acquired your ETH at like much lower prices are pricing things now in ETH, and if you bought your ETH with fiat, like there's a fiat correlation.
Didn't ETH get determined? Didn't the SEC try to say that ETH is a commodity? Am I mistaken?
The SEC or the CFTC? They they would want it to be a security in their.
Okay. I was just thinking because like commodities are priced in USD, and I was thinking, I wonder how the government is pricing out ETH. But if it's a security, I don't think it has to be priced.
Well, it better not be a security. I hope it's not security.
I hope so too. Right?
I subscribe strongly that Bitcoin and Ethereum are commodities.
Yeah, me too.
And SEC and the CFTC are going to have to fight it out. Who gets the win? But CFTC better win this one out because I think it would be a huge hamper towards financial independence and sovereignty for citizens if it was a security in the United States.
Right.
But
on that note, would they literally have to go back to the point of the ICO and figure out who received said commodity? Or security, sorry.
I guess so.
It's kind of funny, right? Because they would have sold unregistered securities in the same way that they accused Ripple of doing, and didn't actually. On that note, didn't Ripple recently win that case?
Yeah, they had a settling, which I think was very positive for them, or something.
Right. So I think about that. I'm like, okay, if Ripple XRP is not a security, how could you possibly say that Ethereum is?
I think the SEC has like some personal beef with this, just like my tin hat moment there. But I at least I understand it with these regulatory entities. It's like they're police, but as police works, when the highway patrol whatever when they drive the car around, It's
Mhm.
by their own presence they stop crime or stop
Right.
decisions. And I think if the SEC is smart, they have to choose the right cases to create
Mm.
the right precedent and the right situational setup, right? And that picking a fight with Ethereum does not sound particularly enduring towards spending what limited budget and woman power you have.
Right.
Because it's, if anything can be damaging to a consumer from Ethereum,
Mhm.
I don't think those damages are measurable in the same way that a securities would be measured. And it's like, what is its damaging vectors of attack? Like, how can you as a consumer be damaged from manipulation within the Ethereum market? And I don't think it is qualifiably similar to any traditional security. It's more similar to a commodity where there's
Right.
like market whales doing a squeeze or a whatever, performing something that would cause a bank run.
Right.
But like a security has a security domain of attack vectors that you as a consumer can be manipulated with, and
Right.
that is where the SEC would have to regulate against, right? So it's like two
Right.
entities I think that are designed to police in different ways. Like even if it's a security or not security, like one is just better equipped to police Ethereum, and I think that by that principle, I know there's a lot of other financial theory and philosophy that you can
Mhm.
use to measure is it a commodity or security, but I think in a more logistical or pragmatic way, the CFTC, in my opinion, is maybe the better organization to
Yeah.
protect consumers within at least the United States, and if that's the case,
Mhm.
maybe that will be the precedent in other Western democracies. But
What I've actually noticed, which is a little bit discouraging, is often some of these Western democracies, smaller than the United States, are almost like test markets for certain financial products, and then they literally use those
yeah.
markets to base regulation in the U.S. Right, like Ethereum having a ETF in Canada. Uh, Good luck getting an ETF in the United States. But they've been using the framework that Canada's using, I think, almost as like it's just like a test net, right? And we'll see what comes out of that. But I do see that happening a bit where you have quite a bit of influence. And not only that, but now you have more than ever nation states creating these international agreements where they're going to work with each other with respect to sharing information or transaction
Yeah.
information. Get this, actually, this is crazy. It goes so far as this. If I go to my bank with a $10 bill, and let's say I need nickels,
Yeah.
so I want to get 5 rolls of nickels or $2 each. They literally require my social insurance number and my name in a database in order to even exchange that cash into change. Real thing.
Oh wow,
Eh,
that's crazy for Canada.
yeah, no, I'm not even joking.
I don't think
And
that's the case in the States. I don't carry enough cash. I don't my last time I think you can just walk into any bank and do
right,
it right now for
right.
us still.
But I see that kind of that process, and it makes me think like, okay, well, like Canada's a pretty small market compared to some of the international markets
Yeah.
out there, and they're practicing the tracking of cash and the movement of currency to the point where they want to know where their dimes and nickels are. Um, the United States, a much more complex, larger market, is going to be working with these regulators and learning from them, no doubt, right? At least that's how I would look at it, and I could be very wrong. But
Yeah, I mean, I think any smart nation in this modern world that wants to still be a nation for the
mhm,
next generations needs to kind of reconcile with this new reality that they already know that currency is power to
mhm,
govern your citizens, to control and to allow them to do or not allow them to do something.
mhm,
But then now that there's a huge new vector of financial productization that is existing beyond their legal bounds, and cash was kind of a legacy expression of that, as they are,
mhm,
yes, they are backed in faith by the government, but their tractability, their settlement is usually
right.
beyond the grips of the government through their institutions.
Hmm.
Um,
Does just a thought, does the United States currently have restricted and unrestricted cryptos?
We can't access some leverage products.
Right, or staking products.
There's some assets, as far as I understand, that if they are a little too gray area in the securities kind of route, you would be not allowed to access those markets.
Right.
From my experience with Matcha, every asset back in the day that was listed and was kind of like whitelisted by Matcha had to kind of get that sanity check that like could this token be allowed in American markets, and if it's not, unfortunately that would not be a thing that we would formally support, and may just put like a massive warning in front of it that we're not condoning any behavior.
Right. Right.
We had IP blocking in Matcha for sanctioned assets in sanctioned countries.
Really?
That was something because we were an American business. We had to abide to American financial law. What else was there? Well, I remember back in the day, there was a few prediction markets that could not, like crypto prediction markets that, as a U.S. citizen, I cannot access.
Right.
With my IP because we cannot access unregistered products like that.
Right. Right.
What else?
On that, there were a bunch of products that came out in the Kusama Polkadot crowd loans that Americans weren't allowed to access, and
you had to be an accredited investor, or
I maybe for some of them, I can't remember the stipulation, but I just know that it was certain nations weren't supposed to access those products. The reason I actually asked about the restricted and unrestricted crypto is because in Canada, there's this new policy. And in my mind, it's just really ridiculous. So you can only in 4 provinces buy crypto without unrestricted limits. And so how it works now, and this is just like newly imposed, is in most provinces and territories in Canada, you can buy up to $30,000 of altcoins and no more. Or maybe I'm thinking 30,000, it might be actually a little less. But there is a limit now. And even on my trading app where I buy Bitcoin or Ethereum and then pull it off into a decentralized wallet or whatever, there's actually an amount tracker now for my restricted and unrestricted cryptos. So my unrestricted cryptos are Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, and Bitcoin Cash. I can buy as much of that as I want to, but I'm limited annually in the amount of altcoin purchases I can make. And so if I start, say I go buy $40,000 of Link, I just broke the law. I bought $10,000 more of an unrestricted cryptocurrency than I'm allowed to according to the law. And it's like an arbitrary number in my opinion. Like it just makes zero sense. But
is this like a consumer protections pitch on the
I don't even know. Like they love us so much. This is that. But it's one of those things where I see this happening in Canada, and I think to myself, well, if they're going to do this in Canada, why wouldn't they do this in the United States, where they've already up until now had quite strict crypto trading policies and regulations?
I think it's I think especially with this bull market, with this bear crash, I think there's been just we gave them all the ammunition, right? To say like Luna is not a good story.
Right.
We got to protect consumers, right? And maybe to do it in good faith, but I at a personal economic, I'm much more libertarian about these things. It's like the market usually sorts itself out. There is pain, there always is. But man, like having financial expressibility is, I think, such an innate right.
Absolutely.
And I find that what I have a lot more qualms with is the focus of regulatory bodies, where you're not regulating against people prying on financial sovereignty and people exploiting that you have financial sovereignty in ways that aren't just strictly scammy. Like to me, it's like I think free trading apps like Robinhood with like Citadel selling their trade flow, like I feel like that's pretty freaking manipulative.
Right.
And that is like an exploitation of the fact that you can move money at your own will.
Right.
Whereas like if you want to blow your money on buying a random shitcoin, like that's your own control to do. I'm a
Right.
lot
Right.
more like sensitive to like why are more privileged institutions or bodies of entities allowed to do things that pry on limited financial on sovereignty of folks.
Right. Right.
And why aren't we kind of looking at that and saying let people be able to do what they do, knowing that there's not that the sharks out there are not protected to do
Right.
sharky activity, right? Like if the sharks are doing it on like a free market, which I think crypto kind of is sometimes, the sharks, fair play to them. You outwitted me. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
um,
I
I don't
mean,
know. Yeah.
some of the quote unquote, sharks out there really are just like taking advantage of I wouldn't even say it's exploitation. Sometimes it's just like they see the nuance in how they can take advantage of that particular technology. Like, for example, the uh, ape coin rinse that happened where, that's genius, right? Or uh, there's been several other cases where people have like arbitrage their way to freedom, financial freedom, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. Um,
But like, I mean, like, I do come from a DeFi true-hearted blue, like a DeFi pumping person who bought into the DeFi world on the principles of financial accessibility and
yes,
sovereignty. So I always have a very skewed perspective on these things. I I feel very strongly that like your money is yours to lose and yours to gain.
right.
And government should not be able to tell you how you want to lose it and how you want to gain more of it.
I
Um,
right.
to an extent. To an
Yeah,
extent.
until they come up to you and they say, I'm going to close your bank account if you don't give me that 33% I'm owed or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's like to me it's like a battle of the wits. Some
Hmm.
of these markets are, and I think that maybe like if the global world, like if people have like just like regular sovereign citizens that do have access to capital,
Hmm.
I think for most folks that they're not quite financially educated or emotionally educated to be able
Mm,
to participate in these markets without regulatory bodies to protect them. I think
right.
that is a natural persistence that if we work in a game theoretic situation where our actors have a lot more willingness to act like sophisticated actors,
Right.
we may see something more different in our needs of regulatory, but we simply don't live in that world. Like I think very distinctively to all the Polygon stablecoins and how they would grow to a certain size, and then some whale just goes in and just like puts a short position and then just crashes their coin. And I was like, all right,
Damn.
comes out with
Yeah.
it. It's like it's not a financial crime. They didn't hack the network or do anything
No.
bad. They just played you like a fiddle. And I
I
was like,
mean,
well,
yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny. You see these tokens come out and they have like a 5 million market cap, and you have a whale sitting on $15 million. They could put
yeah,
$2 million in, take the whole market with them, right? Like,
yeah, yeah,
um,
and like for example, like one of the things like I don't feel very strongly about any of these opinions that I've said for the last some minutes. The only thing I feel very strongly is that yours is yours. Uh,
mhm.
and you know, but then again, like I'm like looking at like the stable coins, like the DeFi, like truly decentralized stable coins, what they call themselves,
Yep.
that are all like pretty much inflation driven. Like how do we deflate a supply to regulate a
Yep. Yep.
price link? We've been doing that since DeFi summer. It doesn't work. I just don't think it
Right.
works. I don't think maybe there is a perfect parameterization of your game theory to get an actual stablecoin to work.
Right.
But I think at this point, we already blew enough money, both consumer money, investors' money, people's time trying to figure it
Right.
out.
God
And like
damn. Yeah.
the only reason why I think we're still doing it is out of sheer freaking greed. Um,
Yeah.
and maybe there's some really good-hearted people that does want a sovereign stable,
Yeah.
but that always sounds so moronic to me, like oxymoronic. It's like
Mhm.
you're
Mhm.
creating a stable coin that is tied to the US dollar, that is tied to $2 trillion getting printed, that's tied to the energy crisis, that's tied to the Ukrainian.
So it's tied to inflation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Essentially.
like it's like It's like
Yeah, it seems very broken. I've always thought this as well, and I'm glad to hear you say it. Like, it's like, I hate the financial institution. We need to get out of it. Let's go create an algorithmic backed stablecoin for the US dollar. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the idea, the philosophy behind it at least seems kind of broken, right?
Yeah,
Or at least there's holes in it.
like for me, it's just like, yeah, we need the dollar because most liquidity, most capital in the world is dollar denominated or fiat denominated, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think it's the more generalized way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
Being fiat denominated, you need to have stablecoins to give them access to non-fiat denominated markets, which makes sense that we need to have these. But then, to that opinion, it's like, depending to wherever citizenship you are and what jurisdiction and which political situation you can find yourself in, I'm largely okay with USDC centralization, being that I'm a US citizen. I don't think it was like a compromise in my heart to know that, well, we do get a less DeFi coin, but at the benefit that this thing is actually a stable coin.
Right.
Versus, like, even DAI has its own fluctuations, and DAI would not survive without USDC as its collateral. So it's like, is that really even a decentralized stable?
You're right. Yeah.
USDT, right, is another one of those, like, I've God knows clue if that's actually backed by anything meaningful right now, but that's why I have a preference. It's like, in this current competitive stablecoin market, if you are a Western democracy person as an American citizen, the USDC is just a better sounding asset.
Right.
But then I'd be happy if there's an actual competitive financial product that we can do business transactions. I can pay people, I can pay salaries, I could do deals with that gives me all the right things that USDC gives, but also gives me more. Maybe it's safer to use without the government standing in your way. Maybe it has better systems risk, better credit risk, because you're not relying on American institutions and their faith that they won't erroneously print.
Right.
But currently, we just don't have a better product.
Have you ever heard of a reserve token by any chance? RSR?
RSR.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure this product's changed a lot since I last looked into it, but they are basically creating a stable coin that at first was very much based on the US dollar, but I think their goal is to debase from the United States dollar and just become a stable value. I mean, it's a carrier of value, but they actually have many different Southern American and Central American countries that are getting set up on this network.
So
I think I'll show it to you.
I keep on have to ask this in DeFi. What does stability mean?
Right.
Like,
Maybe
stability against the US dollar, stability against, like, how much food you can buy month to month. What is your cost of,
probably purchasing power, right? I mean,
right?
we'd hope. And if it's not purchasing power, then you would think that at the very least it would be to stably hedge yourself against inflation, which I don't know how you would do effectively today as well.
But that to me is like a different stability.
Yeah.
Still, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's like a stability of like money supply, which wouldn't there be an argument to be said that Ethereum or Bitcoin would be stable because it has a predictable inflationary supply,
right?
But then its purchasing power one day can be buy a Lamborghini with it, the next day could be buy a Subway 6 foot, like a 6-inch, right? Like it.
When we think about ultrasound money in an economy, do you think that would actually be, and I'm just like, let's do the thought exercise here.
Sure.
Do you think that would actually be beneficial? Because I kind of imagine an asset that keeps going up in value almost perpetually because of the decreasing supply. And assuming this product becomes, a great carrier of purchase value, your purchasing power goes up, people will want to buy more ETH, so the price will just keep rising. And so you have an asset that people want to own, but the price is just always moving forward, moving upwards.
I feel the problem, if that wants to be like a day-to-day asset, it just has a higher cognitive load. than a fiat asset, in the sense that, like, if I run a business, at what cadence do I have to rebase my purchasings? At what point do I have to rebase my salaries? What point do I have to reconceive what is whatever, which we're kind of already doing with inflation, with fiat currencies. But like, it's like, to me, it's like, if it takes more brain cells to like figure out how to use an ultrasound asset versus a fiat, at least right now, I'd be surprised if it's adopted more widely than a fiat. But then fiat has that propaganda narrative where it has inflation, but not much. So people are willing to kind of like sweep it under the bed that my salary doesn't measurably increase, is not expected to measurably increase just on the merits that the asset itself is losing value. Right. Like, there is like a narrative that is perceived. But then, like, if it's an ultrasound asset, I would assume people would have to assume that your salary has to change in reflection to.
It would go up, assuming, right? Or at least the purchasing power thereof would go up. Even if you received less ETH, but ETH was becoming more value, your respective purchasing power should be increasing in the scenario you're talking about, right?
Sure, right. And I think that, like, fiats, to an extent, are, if correctly controlled by a regulatory body or by a federal, a sovereign bank, a good fiat should give you the right balance of purchasing power today and enough motivation to get more of it tomorrow, to get more purchasing power tomorrow. I think for a sovereign bank, that's their design goals, right? Like, they need a currency that people cannot take out pitchforks and start to want to overthrow a government because they can't get food. But then they can't have a currency that, if I just sit on it, it's better than me just using it to grow something. And I think they have a different design parameterization.
The monetary policy is almost like backwards. You know what I mean?
Right. Which I think is towards the interest of a sovereignty, right? That's how they would need to create a currency to stay in power, right?
Right.
And I think the most extreme examples you can see is like the Ripple, the Chinese yuan, right? Right. Like, if they don't keep like the currency value against the US dollar for the yuan specifically, then, you know, Chinese products are just going to get more expensive, and the Americans would stop buying from them, and the economy would not be able to benefit from Western trade as much as they would used to be. So they have to find ways to suppress that price, right? And so they just have a different design philosophy. Because if I were to like, I think, which, you know, I think most folks probably in crypto understand when why there's a housing market problem in China is yuan is not a particularly good asset to hold. Right, like, comparatively speaking, in all the fiats out in the world, that thing just does not hold its value. Period. So you got to park it somewhere. Stocks in China are really crappy. China has a pretty anti-crypto stance. The only place you can park it in a real world asset is a house, right? And we're seeing this really interesting in the fiat world, right? Like, where we're seeing such a huge tumultuous macroeconomic trend. The US dollar relative to other fiats are doing relatively well when it comes to holding up its value. And
but
I think
part of
me,
go ahead. So I was just going to add, part of me wonders if that's simply because of inflation occurring at different rates. Like, it's a matter of perspective. Like, you've got the domino effect happening. So now you have all these smaller currencies that are inevitably going to run, right? So you have all these currencies taking off, and the value looks like it's increasing in power when realistically they're all inflating, but you have smaller, less powerful currencies inflating faster.
Yeah, I think it's really just like perceived like ratios here, more than actually like measurable purchasing power has changed. But like, comparatively speaking, if you were to hold another asset, it's like, if you want to park it in like store of value assets and you don't have dollars around you, surprisingly, the dollar is a measurably competitive asset to park.
Indeed.
Because once you trade it back into your own purchasing power asset, it actually can get you a little bit more than what you started out with, right?
Right, right.
And there's a lot of theories that tries to rationalize this, and I think a lot of them revolve around the U.S. dollar, the U.S. hegemony around the world economy, and how it's a reserve currency of the world.
Yep.
Sovereign banks. There's so much bond products, like debt products, priced in the dollar. So there's always like a need of dollars to pay back debt, right? So there's always there's always a strong latent demand there, or whatever. There's a lot of reasons that people can argue why the dollar has that kind of perception, and I'm certain that the U.S. government is abusing the fact that it has such a strong position.
Right.
With
They're
the
actually
dollar.
Yeah, and there's policies in different respective nations, like for example, Japan, where the actual policy ensures that the dollar is stronger.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so
Yeah, and then there's some more like gray area policies. It's like we got to keep the stronger dollar because it helps our economy, kind of a situation, right?
Yes.
Because the purchasing power of the dollar is, well, American appetite for purchasing, and throwing out the dollar is powerful, right?
Right. Are you under the belief that the United States, I mean, like, I'm curious where you lie in terms of your own understandings and philosophy. Do you believe that the United States dollar needs to be backed by another asset, say gold, or do you think that it being backed by the quote unquote faith and credit, which really just means the debt of the nation, is enough?
No, not really. Well, I say that because I'm very cash light.
Mhm.
I
Okay,
really
yeah.
don't have a lot of dollars.
Yeah.
At
I mean,
all.
me too. I'm the same way.
I don't
Yeah.
hold a lot of fiat, so that's probably one of the reasons I could say this. For what the government needed to do government things, what its current full faith backed by the U.S. government
Mhm.
is honestly low key a massive innovation
Hmm.
when it comes to sovereign control and sovereignty for an organization. It gives them the ability to control perceived value of a currency without tying it to a cultural object that you have no control over, right? Like if it's
Mm.
gold being the thing that's
Mhm.
backing your value, the U.S. government has no capacity to control gold's perception of value because it has had years and years and thousands of years of cultural presence that the U.S. didn't exist to
Right.
create a narrative around, right? But now without that narrative, it's a full fiat. They do have the control over that narrative, and they go out and say what they say about oil or the petrodollar, and do what they do with the WTO, do what they do with sovereign debts, and
Mhm.
who gets access to what, and what you have to do with the dollar and your own currency. It pretty much for them. Like if I was designing a currency and my goals was to create something that allows us to stay in power.
Yeah,
This is
that
a
would be it.
miracle of a tooling. It gives you so
Right.
much more access than something backed by the gold standard, right? So I couldn't
Mhm.
rationalize why it is designed, but then to say after rationalization, in my opinion, it's like I get it. The currency is not designed for us, for citizens. It's designed for them to
Right.
access us, right? So in that case, it's like I have a hard time faulting the dollar more so than say that I'm just gonna make a decision to not hold a lot of it then, like because I
Right.
don't believe
Right.
it's designed for my benefit, right? It's designed for their benefit. But I have to use it because I
Yeah.
live in
In their
your
jurisdiction.
hegemony, right? Yeah, like
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great perspective. I hadn't really thought about it that way. It does. I mean, obviously, the element of control is there, but to think about it with respect to giving, say, or other organizations the ability to have more control because they can control the perceived value. That's really interesting.
which I think
Um,
is why Meta's like Libra thing was shut down so hard by the U.S. Congress and
right.
government
Right.
was they're like hell no, we're not letting you 100 very massive fortune whatever companies create your own reserve currency. Sure,
Right.
it's backed by fiat, but no, like that ruins the hegemony of the U.S. dollar if it does
Right.
gain any significant amount of traction, right? And that was like
Yeah. Do you think you would believe more in the quote unquote dollar created by all these big tech companies than you would in that created by America or
no.
the central banks? No.
I
Yeah.
would take a central bank one. But
Yeah.
here's the key thing: central banks can wage wars.
Absolutely.
That's the big thing. Like you want to keep a
Right.
currency working, you cannot
You have to have an
limit
army.
yourself legally on how you reserve that currency.
Right.
And I'm not a person who would advocate for war or war hawking here,
Right.
but they have more tools at their disposal
Very right. Yeah.
than any legally bounded institution can. Right. And that's just the case. Right.
Yeah.
Which, I think crypto is that miracle of a thing where it's like, oh crap, we somehow figured out how to make a currency without having to wage a war every once in a while.
Right.
Or have to have 8 people locked in a room making random numbers up to control whatever, right? That is, I think, a massive human race level innovation on perceptions of value and scarcity. But then again, where we are not creating currencies the same way a government would create a currency,
right?
Because we have different wants than them, right?
I'm trying to remember the name of the Jason Lowry just came to me. Jason Lowry had put out this post that was really interesting, and I think he was doing like a paper on it in school or something. But basically the premise was that we don't really need to fight wars because the reason why people fight wars is to control energy and resources. But now central banks can just use blockchains like Bitcoin to control energy and resources so they can kind of avoid fighting the war. I'm curious if you've come across this at all.
The first time hearing it, it's interesting.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. I think you find it interesting.
Now, I think that does understand into a POW context world a little bit more.
Right.
Which, with ETH going out to POS, it may not hold truth as much.
Here, I'm going to pull it up for you just so you can see the idea, but because it's very interesting. Let's see. Can you see that, Dave?
Yeah.
And so this is kind of the original breakdown he did. Now he has like all kinds of information all over online, kind of diving into this. Actually, this is a better image right here. So protected and defended with electricity plus code is how he put it here. And then you have your traditional assets, which are protected and defended with military and the rule of law. His argument is not having to waste human life to defend monetized wealth, which I think is pretty interesting, actually.
Yeah. But like, it's like, I wouldn't say it's a replacement. It's like you still need to have everything above, right? Like those are living things. Those are on the Maslow, whatever triangle thing.
Right. Those are at the bottom. Yeah. On Maslow's chart of human needs, those would be right in your physical needs and safety needs, right? And so none of that really gets you self-actualization.
Yeah, it's like I kind of see it's like I think it's a cool observation. I don't think there's materially something groundbreaking. It's like that is what Bitcoin is, but like then again, it's built on the precipice that there is a world where oil fuel land is defended by traditional means, right? And I think the Ukrainian war is a really big reminder to everybody that when there is opportunity to seize such things by force and not by effectively economic or military or law, there will be actors that intended to do so through blood, right? And Ukraine has just geographically, its energy reserves, its position related to the EU markets, to the Black Sea. There's so many things about it that that is good. Like I'm not pro-Russian, but if I were to play a game of Civilization and I played as Russia, I'm going to be honest, I can fully understand. This is a Hail Mary. If Russia wants to stay as a superpower, they need to get access to. They need a warm water port, being that's what the Crimea can offer. And they need to access all that energy and all that people and all that land and all that. They need all that stuff. They want to win out this metaphorical game of civilization. This is like a Hail Mary play, which unfortunately, this has resulted in the heavy loss of life, and a macroeconomic trend that is not particularly interesting. But like,
Mm-hmm.
you can read through the incentives. It's like a huge reminder that like, as much as we are creating fancier and faster value systems and advanced financializations, it still boils down to that, like, to these hard things, which is you need a lot of these things to sustain a strong position in the global pantheon that is our countries, right? Right, and who's gonna fault the United States for somehow literally spawning in the world's freaking best location to start a country, right?
Right.
Like, but because of that, then they were able to create the dollar, and because of that, we were able to start talking about crypto and other things, right? And
Right.
so, yeah, it's very unfortunate to see these things, but
it is kind of like unrealistic to imagine that, you got these really brilliant, brutal leader like Putin, who would just be like, okay, guys, go get your computers out. We're gonna we're gonna code this war. You know what I mean? We're and so
I remember, I think it was Aragon. They were like, we're gonna. They had like this was way back. I don't think it's even anywhere anymore because it's way too ideal. They're like, we're gonna end violence. That was like their punchline on one of their websites. Like Heroes. It was like, what does that mean to end violence? This is like, it's like, am I on Bill Gates Foundation now? Like what are we doing here? Right? Like, how do you end violence? They're like, well, which I think is idealistically can be argued to be very sound. They're like, well, if we can create a world, create a legal and economic system where you get to be making money, but in a way that is untied to your real world identity, then your money cannot be stolen via your real meat body, as in they can't like put you under some kind of form of
under duress or whatever,
to access them. But then I'm like, I keep on thinking, it's like, well, how are you going to buy food? You're still going to have to go back to the meat body, right? Like, like unless these are all automatas, like AWS servers running EC2 instances running this economy. But then again, is that really an economy if no humans are involved? It's like you can't end violence unless you materially change how scarcity works when it comes to some of these things.
I mean, I don't even know if you can end violence, period, because I mean, even if you were to change the laws of a nation, that doesn't govern the morality of every individual present, right? And so I would imagine right now that if we were to abandon all laws, we probably wouldn't improve as a nation. We would, like there's no. I do find that kind of funny that, and I think this must be propagated top down, because like there almost is a belief system in politics that new better laws will create better people, right? And what a lie that we tell ourselves, right?
Anyway, and dude, in the tech world, we shape that narrative as better tech makes better humans. Better tech enables humans to be better, whatever way you want to call it. Right. You get a smartwatch because it makes you healthy. You use Facebook, you get access to more people, you get network better, you get to bond with your friends more, whatever. It makes you a happier person or whatever. I gave you 50 ads, right? But like, and I think that even crypto has this problem. Like crypto, I think the DAO narrative is especially problematic, and this is like they think DAOs makes us better angels.
You're right.
DeFi thinks we become better angels because it's you have access to it anywhere 24/7.
Right.
You don't have to be an evil. No, it's like I don't think any of these things have changed the human spirit and who we are, and as living beings, biological entities, computers that have to operate within the constraints of how we perceive the universe, right? And planet Earth. So to that point, it's like DAOs don't change that. Like we still struggle to work in those same ways. It's just DAOs allows us access to capital in ways that maybe we haven't before.
Right.
But that's about it.
Even like to add to what you're saying about DAOs, the thing that's really frustrating is like people who operate DAOs almost believe that there are new rules for how organizations operate, right?
Yeah.
As if like all of the proven methods that have been like written down to a science are no longer applicable to anybody within a DAO format.
Yeah.
And it's right. And so you're like, you bring in some sort of a corporate mechanism that works to promote organizational behavior. And they're like, I don't think that's going to work here. It's a DAO. We want to stay away. You know what I mean? It's just the attitude behind it. And we did experience that a bit with London too, where it was like, hey guys, let's try imposing some structures. How about some what do we call them? Well, basically some form of governance structure, right? But soon as you mentioning governance structure, a lot of people are thinking corporate hierarchies.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like in general, there's like a distaste towards obviously our current financial system. So people are hesitant to use any of the tooling, even if it works, that pertains to them, right?
Yeah, which like, and in the amount of like mental remapping we do,
Mm-hmm.
like if you think about it, like
Right.
if you look at any of the governance forums and all this stuff, it's like this is just like how normal stuff is regulated. Like there's nothing about it that's particularly a miracle.
Right.
And if we were to, and they just kind of remapped it as like, oh, this is this VC and that VC. It's like you guys are regulating these bodies just as how we probably did before, but maybe with different tools to regulate and what to regulate.
Right.
Now, I do think crypto has an opportunity to create organizations that fundamentally reimagine how we humans can organize.
Yes.
And I think consensus algorithms are a huge precipice that there is that possibility.
Yeah.
But I do think it will demand such a reevaluation of what is a human organization that most DAO creators at this current time cannot strip beyond from what we think of what is an organization of humans, a corporate structure. But like if you look at what like POW is, it isn't a decentralized autonomous system as in it all automatically works organization of entities that you can freely exit and enter, but dependent to your merits of profitability, right? But to that they had to completely reimagine what this organization does. They're not saying like, oh, we're controlling 6 parameters, all we're doing is racing a problem through, right? But that to me was the miracle of the blockchain technology space is we took what could be done with humans and said, actually, we've been looking at this problem entirely wrong the whole time. And said that if we actually took a reductionist perspective and said that instead of trying to do 3,000 things with a organization and have to make an organization that's capable of doing HR, doing all this stuff, let's reduce the problem space. All I care.
I'm not sure if our viewers can still hear you, Dave. I have this hosting from my end here, so you guys should still be able to see and hear. It looks like Dave's having a connectivity issue. He will rejoin us shortly. So far, it's been a pretty great conversation, a little bit over time compared to our previous podcasts, but it's been an exciting conversation with lots of different avenues. We haven't even gotten into any of the meat around updates in the studio, which we'll hold off for next week when we have both Ash and Dave to dive into that. I'm just waiting here to see if Dave is able to reconnect so we can continue our conversation. I'll just give that a minute. I'm going to send him an invite link. Let's see. looks like Dave had a Wi-Fi problem. So he is just getting set back up. He should be able to rejoin us. He just joined as Bitwizard number 2.
Okay, 2 digits.
So
Sorry.
yeah. I said you just joined as Bitwizard number 2. So I don't even know how to update your name for you, Dave. So I would do it, but for
It's
now,
beyond the powers of this tool. So
yeah, that's all right. Yeah, but it's been a pretty great conversation today. I know we've gone a little over time compared to what we usually do. But there's been so many interesting avenues of this conversation. I'm wondering if you want to just continue what you were talking about before.
Yeah, my point was to say that, like, I think like NFTs, like DeFi, you can't look at the problem the old way and expect a new answer.
Right.
You can't use Web 2 thinking to create a Web 3 answer, is what I'm trying to imply.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a materially different understanding, and I remember so vividly, and I don't mean this as if like you gotta like brainchild like new thinking every single time. What I'm really implying is just like you gotta be open-minded enough about all the problems that of like what do you actually want to solve, and
Right.
and why I say this is like I remember so vividly when Uniswap came out, and I was working at 0x protocol, and technically we both had the same problem of how in the heck do we provide decentralized liquidity to buyers and sellers, right? We at 0x, the order book model implied pretty much creating Coinbase or the NASDAQ, but decentralized, right? Which is you create orders, you submit orders, you fill orders, whatever, right? Which is pretty much just how a standard order book on any centralized exchange would have worked. It's a Web 2 thinking applied to a Web 2 world, to a Web 3 world. Now, do I think it has succeeded? I would argue it only had worked in like the NFT world to in a context because it makes a little bit more sense there. But then like we were all imagining it for trading DAI, trading ETH. Now, does 0x protocol right now use order books to an extent? Yes, but most of its liquidity, just go on Matcha, for example, you buy an order, most of them comes from AMMs, right? But like, what did AMMs really conceive? It was like, well, actually, guys, we thought of the problem wrong the whole damn time.
Right.
Liquidity, the market makers are too like these things are too small cap. I'd rather trade off sophistication. I would rather trade off capital efficiency to get a market going, which is, if you think about it, a professional market maker will always be more capital efficient than like an AMM would be, right? But they made that trade-off. Right. But that's a fundamental like assumption you were willing to have to give up, which would leave you from a Web 2 thinking to a Web 3 world. Where it's like, well, gas fees are expensive, so we can't be sophisticated, but we could be a little bit capital inefficient because we're getting less technically sophisticated, right? Yeah. And in that way, that was a huge assumption you had to make about thinking about AMMs. And then, but like if you think about it, AMMs existed in the Web 2 world too. But for very small market cap assets, there's no way to create a market maker for it. You have to use an AMM. Trading securities for or insurance options for
You're right.
San Francisco earthquakes.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna market make that. You gotta AMM that thing. But like, in my opinion, DeFi finally was able to let go of some of those assumptions to how markets has to exist to be able to kind of like see through all of what they used to think is not a solution and say, actually, holy cow, that might just be it. That might just be it, right? And I think that's what initially POW did to the whole movement of assetization. Is let's rethink the problem. I think that's what smart contracts did. Let's rethink the problem of financialization and assetization, which is let's just make a damn really good calculator. I don't care about the legality of it. It's a good calculator. The calculator is still better than law, right? Like it settles based on code, right? Yeah. And then I think what DeFi was really willing to innovate was let's trade off sophisticated efficiency and capital efficiency to get markets going with less sophisticated actors. And we started from there and made it Uniswap work. And from there we got money markets, right? Like lending protocols, right? Those are pretty much, you dump a massive crap load of money there, you park it, and you let two math algorithms control exactly how the market rates are, right? And utilization ratios. They're really dumb, simple stuff, right? Like, but there was a reflection of change of how we perceive the problem, and how we perceive solutions can exist. And I think the NFT market had that moment as well. And I think PFPs was a kind of a paradigm shift where we're like, oh wait, we don't have to just make ENS domains all the time. We don't have to think about utility. We could think about just creating brand value and spreading it out. We revisited a problem, but then every time you visit a problem, the next time you try to solve a problem with that same answer, the answer gets less effective every single time subsequently, to a point where eventually the market overheats and bubbles out. And I think we're at a point with the NFT market, at least, where we're just right at that point where we're like, crap, the old answer worked, and it still does work. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but we are now in search for a new way to look at the problem, for a new answer. And I'd like to think, as a studio, that's what we're really interested in. And I think the DAO world needs to go through that too, because I'm not really within the DAO world at all, to the extent that I work and build tools within it. But I feel like since day one, within how like Aragon back in the day worked, it just doesn't feel like we saw the problem differently enough to be willing and open-minded enough to see where real solutions lie. There was like there was a moment of era where DAOs were really getting a little too game theoretically crazy, where they're like, well, humans are really, really crappy atomic machines. So what if we created stronger game theory on the implication that humans are bad? But then stronger game theory doesn't quite work right now. We have there's Futarchi models, prediction market governance. There's so many different abstract, very, very, very complex governance, even quadratic voting, right? Or the funding model that is Gitcoin, right? They're all pushing on it, but maybe one of them is the right solution. But then again, what's the problem you're trying to solve, right? And I think that good DAOs, to an extent, I think DAO problem, because multi-sig DAOs, they're not DAOs. You're just a non-legal limited liable corporation. You're just a non-legal LLC.
You're a limited partnership organized on a Discord.
Yeah, that's what it is. Right. I think where the DAOs really get the real DAO problem space, I think, is governing public goods, public assets, public systems, and that's still something that I think there's a lot to be worked on, right? And that means governing Uniswap. That means governing, hopefully, a future marketplace, NFT marketplace, is properly governed by a public structure. But again, I'm not particularly bullish.
Yeah, it's very difficult to create a tool that will allow you to do that effectively. Because I was just thinking, Aragon fell very short of that. Commonwealth was even worse. Do you know Commonwealth? Yeah. You have just a few other platforms that just weren't great. And so I feel like almost the tool that we're searching for, at least I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, and compound governance. I know a lot of places deploy compound governance structures. It's just a revision of stakeholder voting. Which again, I'm not faulting that in any particular way. I think that's totally reasonable. But then if you look at the governance, it's default governance, which is not a fault of the system, but the fault of humanity, right? You vote with the biggest answers, tends to be, because you're lazy, right? So in Compound, for example, if Continent Finance, which is one of their biggest entities there, votes, I want to support a collateral ratio of 82% for Ethereum, who's going to vote no? Right? Now that's a very uncontroversial decision, but when there is a controversial decision, what happens? Right? Will there be a forking event? Will there just be default governance at play? I know that there's quite a few universities that have a lot of compound that they can vote with. Yeah. But I'm sitting here. I'm gonna be honest. What's your voting decision here? What's your voting matrix here? Do you just vote yes because Polychain Capital voted yes? Is there a situation where blockchain at Berkeley, blockchain at Michigan, blockchain at Texas AMM or whatever will ever vote against these institutions. Like
I hear
at this
you.
point, it's just like theatrical
Right.
signaling, right?
Right. If Ethereum was to fork at this point, what happens with regard to the layer 2 networks? Does the new
They have to
network...
choose a place.
Oh shoot, that sucks.
Maybe they could have two
Yeah.
places, but I imagine that's incredibly dumb because you have to bridge your assets.
I was
back
gonna
somewhere.
say, yeah, wouldn't that be just like piss poor for the market in general, like breaking up all the liquidity and kind of just like segregating the massive users, and like, wouldn't a fork be a bad idea at this point?
Oh, it would be. Yeah, like it, like
To put it simply, yeah.
You need a lot of people to buy into your fork because one of them will not survive.
Yeah.
You're not going to get two of them to persist. I'd be very the amount of
Right.
money that has been layered into the system is just too much to be willing to have two versions of it coexist.
Right.
And like oracles, stuff like that. Like, how are we going to get all these things to?
Yeah, that's what started going through my mind too. I'm like,
Right.
So one network's getting information from Chainlink, the other one's using API 3, I guess. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's like a lot of complexities, right? And then
Yeah.
who has a then, if I'm let's say that happens, right?
Yes.
There's two equal Ethereums, both trading DAI at a whatever floating rate is.
Yeah.
Here's my problem now. If I were to borrow money on ETH layer 1, wouldn't that oracle have to have a price oracle of ETH layer 2, ETH fork 2? But an ETH fork 2 would need to have an oracle of ETH fork 1. They both have to referentially oracleize each other because they both have very active markets that needs to know what the global market price is for Ethereum to DAI is, or both of their markets would fail, right? So then at that point, it's like,
damn,
what happens, right? Like,
right. How do you get the average of that? Yeah.
And it's like, if there is a slippage, it's like, well, who's going to arbitrage it? Will there be such a big opportunity to arb? Just look at the complexities. It's like, I feel like it's so complex that most people are like, yeah, fuck it, we're not. The best answer is to choose a side and just say we're done. We're not solving this problem. Like, that's your problem to solve. If you want to, you go regulate Polygon on your network. We're gone, right? Like, but then, like, I think layer 2s have a very vested interest in creating only one good L1, because your L2's security is based on the security of your L1.
Right.
If your L1 has split it into two, that means half of your security portfolio just was lost to somewhere else, right?
Shit, right.
And so then why would you have an interest in supporting a fork? You want to have the biggest, strongest L1 to be your base network, right? And so so if you do fork, how are you going to get like Polygon to buy into your fork beyond then bribing them with a bazillion dollars, right?
Right.
You can't do that to them and Optimism and to Arbitrum to everybody and still have money to lay around, right? And make a profit after this whole venture.
Right.
So
do you
and then
think
you got to buy an OV compound. They got to be able to say that, like your debt there we call it sovereign debt, or we're willing to back it in faith as true debt. But then, like, how are you gonna get that done? Right? Like,
even like LP pools would be a nightmare in this case.
The whole thing would just like
it would just break. You
could only do it when Ethereum had nothing on it back in classic days.
Right.
So
we're past those days. Yeah. Do you think that it will be attempted? Do you think that there will be a
well, with the whole merge, there was the ETH fork that people were trying to dump, right? But like, people will. But like for example, for me, I traded against that news. There was going to be, so there's quite a bit of folks that were like trying to accumulate Ethereum, trying to get the fork ETH and dump it on the market and make some money, right? But for me, that created like about a month where ETH was so short in supply that anything that required ETH, they were giving you like straight free money to take your ETH from you. For example, like there was like a moment where you can literally buy like staked ETH, like Lido ETH or SB or like Coinbase ETH for like 90% of any like it's straight up
Oh,
like
really?
like
Wow.
if you think about it, a Lido ETH is 1 ETH plus interest that you get access to it within a year. But it was like trading at 90% of a 1 full ETH price.
Oh my God.
That means that
Yeah.
people were so willing to move to ETH to get the hard fork, which I thought was really, 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 really dumb. Because I was
Yeah.
like, to me, I was like, wait, 90%, that's free money. Like it's like I just have to wait a year to access this free money. I'll wait a
Right.
year for like a really riskless ETH trade. So I traded against that, and I
Mhm.
took a lot of I took a good chunk of my ETH, and I just moved it into Lido, and effectively got 10 to 20% more ETH
Right.
without trading against a dollar, right? Like, which is like I just have to wait a year to access it, which I mean, but then again,
Is
I
it
could use
locked
off
or?
because Ethereum is locked.
Yeah.
Layer 2, the merge is still locked, but I can borrow against it with OV to get
Yeah.
credit if I need to like pay for living, right? So, but like it's free ETH, guys. But
Yeah.
which I was like, again, I was very surprised that opportunity for one existed at the size that it
Mhm.
did exist, because it was usually only about like 3 to 5%. But then I was like, holy cow, this is 10 to 12%.
God.
Like,
Yeah.
like that's not even a US dollar based differential. That's a theory. That's like a ultrasound currency. You don't get that kind of
Yeah.
discount that easily.
Next time, call me. All right. No.
I'll let you know. Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's still trading at a discount, but not as bad as it was.
Hmm.
And I do think there was a few other whales that were thinking with bigger money than I had to dispose of or to access with, that were like, well, shit, I'm gonna trade 1,000
Why
ETH
not? Yeah.
into Lido, get 1,100 ETH now.
Yep.
That's also accruing 4% on principal moving forward.
Such a great deal.
You're like, hey, like it's 4% interest rate, which yes, inflation rate is high right now, but 4% against Ethereum, not even against USDC, against Ethereum. That's on an ultrasound currency that everybody's burning now. That's like the trade of the century. Cool. Like I think it's like one of the most the biggest risk is obviously if Lido collapses. Right? You're holding an asset that isn't Ethereum anymore. But that compared to saying I'm going to YOLO buy a 500x leverage position on Robinhood, or trying to dump a ETHW staked ETH like W fork on Binance.
This is very similar to, in my mind anyways, how crowd loans worked. You could take a bit of your Kusama on the Kusama network and give it to some company that's going to give you tokens back right away. You know, you're going to get a certain APY. You get certain percentage of those tokens up front. You get your Kusama back in 11 months. And it was very profitable to the point where some people were walking away with crowd loan tokens valued more than the Kusama tokens they'd lent, right? So some people were literally doubling their money. I had at one point done way better than that, and then I sat on it, and then the crash happened, and now I'm just let's see what happens when it goes back up one day.
It's a little tier.
Yeah, it's a little tier, but
I've done my share of those stuff.
Yes,
I've had my era of degenning. I feel like to work in DeFi, you had to at some point degen a little bit in DeFi, and I've lost my share of money because of my degenning activities.
Yeah.
So I say some of these things kind of like with the gritting teeth that like
I hear you.
With the position, I know which positions if I knew this, I would have probably not done it that way. But then again, history is 2020.
It's funny like that though, because like I know that everybody who's been in the space long enough will sit there and off the top of their head could probably give you 5 times they could have been a lot richer. You know what I mean? Like,
I could have bought 20 Unisocks. But then my ledger was out of battery, and I was too lazy to plug it and do whatever, because I had a Nano way back. Or maybe it was maybe not the ledger was out of battery, but like it just wouldn't connect to my computer, and I got lazy. I was like,
I hate that kind of thing. Like it was the same thing with for example, like even the OP airdrop for myself, where I actually had multiple computers that I was doing OP activity on. And one of my computers, every time I tried to do a transaction on it, it would fail for whatever reason. No, it would be RPC issue, JSON, whatever. And because of that, I didn't get the multiple user bonus for the OP distribution. So like little things like where you just kind of like just miss the mark, or like for example, this one really sucks. Like DYDX did an airdrop, but they had like epochs, right? Epoch 0.
Yeah.
And it was like valued at like 12,000 USD. And all I had to do was spend $5 to claim it in that epoch. And I wasn't aware that I had to do it within that epoch. The epoch goes, and then everybody's like, wait, where is my token balance? Right.
I missed the DYDX. I used DYDX too, but
Yeah.
I lost that private key.
Oh shit. Yeah.
It's still somewhere out there sitting with $200
Did you claim?
ETH. No, I couldn't claim because I didn't have that private key, so I never got that DYDX token back. I've played my share in stable coins, lost some money trading some shit coins because of that.
Right.
I got sandwich attacked quite badly once.
Oh really? Like a really good
like
kind of thing?
it was good to the point where like I sat there looking at the sandwich. I'm like, yeah, good on you. Like good on like I kind of just like sat there just like slow clap. I was like,
right. You're like,
good on you for preying on my dumbassery. Like it's like
yeah. I think like the moment that comes to my mind kind of like that was like I came across this product and it was like 3,000% APY, right? So I tweeted it and I was like, this is really interesting. Like, why is it 3% or 3,000% APY? And it was like, and it's version 2 of the protocol and it says it's audited. I'm going to go play around with it, right? The next day I get rugged like, 20K or something. And I'm like, yeah, that was my dumbassery right there. Like I even tweeted about it because I knew something was up and I continued to play with the product anyways.
But like, I feel like that's something the non-crypto world can't reconcile with sometimes with us.
Yeah.
It's like the human spirit is pretty easy. It's pretty easy for us to just do things that in retrospect is irrational. And I think that the real world has such a strong fear of the irrationality of actors that they're not like, once it happens once, they'll do everything in their power to stop it. Like that I think that's literally how recessionary sovereign policy is.
Yeah.
It's like something bad happened, we'll do everything in our power to stop the bleeding. But then sometimes it's like you need the wound to clot. Like like I think a lot of the folks who have been in crypto long enough, it's like we all done stupid stuff. None of us done non-stupid stuff. It's because we did stupid stuff and just came out of it feeling like I don't hate my wife enough to not want to be in crypto again. Like you still somehow stuck along. That's when you get the dividends for doing stupid stuff.
You're so right.
Right? Like and I think a lot of people outside of crypto is like, you guys are losing your money left or right. It's like it's almost like we're facing the sun and saying, come at us, like we're dumb, but like we'll outlive you.
That's funny. You know what I noticed too, though, that like keeps the cycle going. That's really funny. Is like you'll have people do stupid stuff and they get burned, and then they do something stupid to try to not get burned, right? And so like I've done this. Like for example, that trade that I lost my money on, I went and I bought an NFT, and then I later sold that NFT and ended up with more tokens than I had originally because I sold that NFT. But it was such a degen play because you know what I mean, and like it's
classic revenge trading, right? Like
don't do it. Just don't do it.
I feel like for a lot of folks it's like I think there's stronger willed people out there, but I think on the bell curve they exist on like the you can't see the line kind of part of the bell curve. I think it's very natural to have these tendencies. That's just the mind is wired in a way that way. The only way you're gonna fight it is you do it enough, or your brain is consciously locking yourself out enough.
Yeah,
I feel like we all had to have like the only way you stop revenge, either you never trade, period. You never touch it, or you traded once, you revenge traded, you experienced what it experienced, and hopefully you learned the next time.
Hopefully.
But even sometimes you don't hopefully learn it. But like there's only two ways through the problem. It's either through sheer force of will you get through it, or you just never touch it. But if you never touch it, it's kind of like ignorant. It's like you're being ignorant of what is really reality. Like you call it revenge trading, but you can use the same exact probably like reactionary behavior and apply it to career decisions, apply it to romantic decisions, to familial decisions, to educational opportunities or just whatever opportunities, right? Like it happens everywhere to an
The
extent.
rebound is like the
Yeah.
perfect example, right? I got
Yeah.
dumped. I'm gonna go find,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and I think people fault crypto thinking that it's like a crypto problem. It really isn't.
Yeah.
It's like a human being human problem. It's just that we kind of exacerbate it and give you a number and a headline you can write on your like articles that you can, and then other people can shit on it. Which, to be fair, I shit on other people doing other things as well. It's again another human behavior.
It's human nature. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like,
yeah.
but it's just like, I don't know. It's like, you know, in crypto, we all have to lose some money to know how to gain money.
Yeah.
We all have to lose some money to know what it is worth. But then again, like I think like my key narrative to DeFi has always been, you trade at your own risk parameters, but you don't know your risk parameters until you exercised it.
You're right.
That's just the true and honest part of it. It's a muscle that you got to learn to develop, and you get riskier sometimes, you get less risky, and the only way to know it is just to play, to, you know, to actually exercise that muscle, and exercising that muscle to me just implies you're gonna screw up.
Right. You're kind of making me laugh because I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm like, well, the one time where it was like 3008 and I got rug, right? And I'm thinking like, well, I went and I bought Ohm like a year later. Like, what did I learn? You know, right?
Oh, I've done my share of. Yeah, I've enough skeletons in my closet that, you know, I'm sometimes sitting there, I'm like, how the hell am I still like financially solvent? Like,
yeah, how did I get here?
yeah, but like that, I think that's where like I always like say that to a point of exhaustion. It's like the best thing to do in crypto is outlive every other fucker who couldn't outlive you, right? The space moves fast enough. The space has enough opportunities. At the end of it, the most valuable thing that you're building is your own knowledge. That as a asset is absurdly valuable in this world. It gets you so far. It opens doors when you're like, oh yeah, I've been there, or I've seen that, or I've experienced
100%,
right. And I think the amount of and I know that maybe some people already know that if you've been on Discord, I keep on harping on this. Survivor bias is real. Stop using somebody else's story to measure your own success.
Absolutely. Right.
Because the only stories you hear in crypto are the most successful stories on Twitter. But success can be measured in so many other ways in crypto. And as in a bear market, you need to find the other ways of success measuring. And sometimes success measuring is as simple as waking up and still caring about crypto.
That's a good point.
I think people just need to kind of evaluate that's the case. And I think a lot of people have been trying to measure us as a studio against the largest PFPs. It's like, folks, I would love to have given that to you.
Yeah.
Half of that was out of my control. The other half is through my own stupidity. The other half is just not something I'm interested in doing. It's not my creative intrigue. So like, if you add this all together, what can I say beyond just saying like, maybe we just have to reevaluate what success means and what surviving means in this business, right? And to me, like, I look back on our history and proof beaters, but there would have been a lot of things that would have changed, a lot of things. But at the end of it, it's like, I think I had to rebuild my success narrative. It's like, well, we lived, we grew, we are a brand, people care about what we do. There's clearly an intrigue towards our quality of work. People respect us. It's like, and we're still here and motivated to fight on. It's like,
yeah,
I call it good. I call it like I'm sitting here counting my blessings now versus like, crap, why couldn't we have become Yuga Labs with 100 ETH floor fidenzas sitting around, 100 ETH hashes? Like, I really do hope that hash can be marketably appreciated by the grand masses. But man, if you take that perspective and you're just like living your bear markets by waiting for that day will not come.
No.
And I've learned that the hard way through my prior NFT experience. It was like, because I built a lot of NFTs before building Proof of Beauty.
Right.
Had zero traction. You always wonder, it's like, oh, I have to wait for the day. It's like, no. Like, that doesn't work like this. It's you just kind of have to have a better evaluation.
It kind of reminds me of, like, I think it was in 2018 when the market kind of went crashed, and then all the alts started or before that, and then it started all the altcoins started taking off, and like all these people are holding all these like alts, and like these alts will have their day, and then they're looking over like all these new altcoins are pumping during that pump, and like there was no measure of success for these altcoins, and they were using other currencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum as their measure of success, which is comparable to what happened in the NFT market, where you're using, you know, Bored Ape compared to Epics as if they're equal, or as if they have the same intention even, right?
Yeah. And, you know, I think now I'm not saying this as if like I'm like trying to make people like, oh, you're seeing the world wrong kind of perspective. It's like, I get it. If you've been in a PFP world exclusively, or even in like the generative art world, you see a studio like us, you would manifest a label around it that is familiar to you, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of people entry into our ecosystem with that perspective. And now I do think it is part of my job description to be open-minded and willing to bring you guys into our world and say we do things a little differently, but we're also hoping to be empathetic that you did come from a world that we need to be familiar with as well. Like we can't be completely alien to. Now that balance is absurdly hard to strike because frankly, I don't think there's many other studios that have to do this that I could just talk to and say, how do you deal with this problem? Right. Like, or people's like, how do you deal with this mentally as a creative person, or as a business operator? Right. It's a very, not to make it sound like unique main character situation here.
Yeah.
It's a problem that I think I've been reconciling with quite often. It's like, as we can't high horse people. Like I just don't think that's the right thing to do. But then again, we need to be able to stand our ground and say that no, we're not this. We're not that. How do we approach in a way that we can both kind of meet in the middle? Because I don't think any of our projects can be measurably placed against a PFP, right? Or Epics. This is one of the many small examples, and I don't really see how we work internally like a PFP studio, right? Like
I was just gonna add, like I wouldn't even include Epics in the same genre as a typical PFP because it's so gamified. Right?
Yeah, and you know, we don't. I like in chatting with PFP teams along the way. They look at what they do at a day-to-day level very differently than us.
Right.
Now, it gives me more conviction at the end of the day that I think, and this is something that I've had my own misgivings about when folks come along and they're like, "Oh, let's businessify your process." That to me just sometimes sounds like, "Oh, let's PFPify your process," which is like then again, it's like that's not quite how we work. Now, is there things that we can learn from the PFP world? Yes. But if you give me another few $1 million, I probably can do it. But again, I have to have an interest in doing it. I don't really have an interest of somebody giving me $10 million and running a PFP community show. It's just not my creative empowerment, you know?
Yeah.
So we find that balance, but I think as a studio, we're probably the most daring of them all to just be like, yep, there's nobody else that's done it before, and we're going to try and cross our fingers it works. If it doesn't, we pick ourselves back up. We try again. If it does work, we learn something. The whole world learns something with us.
Right. Hopefully.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully.
Hope they're paying attention. Right.
Yeah. And, you know, that's something that, like, I think Hash to me still holds such a special place in my heart. Is it's born out of so much elegance, but the story of it, of what people can use to do the archaeology, that was such a fun,
so fun
time, right? And that's why I think as much as there's probably financial opportunity to do Bitcoin history,
right?
I have a personal, deep intellectual love to want to bring back that energy to people and make people experience NFTs in a way that maybe they experienced before or never have, right? And I think London during its era did that, and like some of the ideas that you propose and we have internally, what we could do with composability, expressibility of NFTs and other NFTs.
Yeah, there's so much there. Like,
like I'm gonna be honest, I have zero clue if that thing's gonna market perform.
right.
And I think anybody who tries to tell me is all speaking out of their ass
Totally.
because it's like there's nothing to compare against.
You know what though? Like I had this thought about hash last night when Leonidas was revealing the new domain system.
Right.
There was a lot of people who didn't know how to look at the contract, and it made me think like the reason why hash probably hasn't seen more adoption, one of the reasons anyways, is an education problem. And with enough time, I wonder if there will be almost like a reignition of love for the fun of using hash as more people become attuned to Etherscan, gas prices, transactions, hash codes.
I think it will have its resurgence.
Right.
I genuinely believe there's going to be a because it's like that's what we tried to do with hash v3, right? That was our philosophy, was it had to be more approachable, but it came into a market that just wasn't really wanted like that kind of NFT anymore. It was
almost too early.
It was too early. It was either too early or too late, because if it was early enough in the early bull market where people were kind of interested in weird novelty NFT experiences, like there was like an era where everybody was doing bonding curves. People were doing Euler beat styled stuff. Like if we released V3 then, it probably would have been received very well.
Probably.
But then the time that we did release it, which was like Q2 of this year, this was the era of like the Bored Apes and all the PFPs being PFPs, and just the appetite for hash wasn't quite there. But I think that's where I personally feel there's still some things that I think we could have done if we were to do a V4. There's some fun, exciting ways to make hash even more experiential.
Right.
Like we could do totally like a contract page where you just see like a list of all the latest contract interactions. There's so many. We kind of played with that with the My Saga experience, where you got like your own history transactions and stuff like that. We played with it, but just we are a business, and unfortunately, the case was just like the returns wasn't quite clear yet in the current short term. But I think what V3 is, I hope, can carry us into a resurgence.
Yeah.
And we do have plans to access the Bitcoin history world. I think that just opens up a massive treasure trove of history again.
Yeah. When I just had a thought about that, though. Love to hear your thought on this. Like, how many people even know how to find Bitcoin history?
Oh, I don't like.
I mean? Like,
I should have had to ask Ash first. It was like, well, what's your Etherscan again? Like,
yeah. Like, do you use
question.
blockchain.com or what are you using? And I think about that and I'm thinking like, okay, I wonder if like even Toshi would be, or whatever you want to call it, would be too early. Like if maybe there needs to be like a bit more time for people to even care about the history of the blockchain they're using. Or it's like, hey, like all this cool stuff was built here. How was this built? Like, where was it built? Where can I see that it exists? I don't know. Like thinking about it and I'm like, perhaps it will have the same problem that hash had. At least hash, maybe the first iteration of hash where people had to learn how to use it. Now, luckily, like that caught an awesome wave. Like Genesis came out at a good time. But I wonder how many people are going to be able to commit to the journey that is discovering a Bitcoin hash and turning it into art, right?
Yeah. What's the meeting? Huh? Sorry.
No problem. Take your time. Take your time.
我在 meeting 中呢，
你没吃着饭，
我跟人录话，你不能说话。Oh my gosh. Sorry, that was my grandma.
That's okay.
She doesn't like. I was trying to conceptualize what is a meeting. I was like,
oh my how do I describe this to her?
Like my Chinese is already poor enough that like I don't even know how to say it to her, so I just had to like push her, sheepdog her away. But yeah, like this is something that I've constantly came back to, and like I don't have an answer anymore.
Yeah,
it's like how much of our work is artistry and how much of it is business, and that's where I find so much intrigue in learning how movies are made, because they're one of the most commercially intensive pieces of art if they are art and
Right.
not just commercial property.
Right.
Because like I think Nolan really has to skirt that balance of like, is this artistry? Is this something that we're creating that people can appreciate as art? But then I have to convince Warner Bros. To give me X million dollars to do it. And I need to be thinking and be sensitive of the market of people willing to receive my art, right? And so I think a lot of people building NFTs now are maximizing the commerciality of it.
Yeah.
Or maximizing the artistry of it. Where I kind of stand to say that when your problem becomes a little bit more multivariate, like a hash, the problem answer has to become multivariate as well, 2-dimensional. And it's like, are we approaching hash with this like, oh, you kind of have to come to us and learn our thing, or should we take on the perspective that there's a timing problem? Should it be like a whole, oh, we got to build the most easy to use experience so newcomers can be onboarded? Because like, to an extent, we never were able to get access to Genesis level intrigue, even though we made it magnitudes easier to experience, right? So to an extent, it was like, well, at a business perspective, I would make an argument to say that V3 and Saga were better business decisions, but Genesis just was a pure artistry. At least for me, that's the whole website felt. Well, I built the website in the sake of artistry and not for UX. The whole experience was about artistry, and so to that, it's like, well, how did you measure success here? Well, I guess financially, one was more successful than the other. That is a pretty boneheaded way to measure it. But to me, it's like, how much was it luck? How much was it this or that or timing, right? And at the end of it all, it's like, there is no right answer to me. It's like, you do what makes you feel the best at this very moment. And I think as a studio, we've always leaned on the artistry side when it comes to our work. We have always been art first, then thinking about the business decisions. That we don't make business decisions that are obviously flagrantly bad, but we may not make decisions that are obviously flagrantly greedy. So it's like something that, like, when I think about ABF, it's like, well, I still don't know how we make a freaking penny out of it, right? Like, right. But then, like, there's others like hash. Like, clearly there was a financial incentive for us to keep it going, right? But to me, it's like that artistry of like people going on like Google BigQuery the first time, people going to Etherscan, trying to find like a contract mint, people learning how all the 50 transactions part of the DAO hack was participated. Like, that to me was so powerful. And that, even if Genesis made nothing, I would have given that more success. Because, and that's also something the hash I love about hash is when we tell people about hash that are non-crypto, it lights up for them. They're like, oh, this is cool. But then again, there's like a weird, like, it's like a weird thing where most people in crypto, if you ask them how a smart, like, where is a smart contract? Nobody has an answer. Nobody really knows what that means yet. What is the EVM? Nobody really quite knows what that means. What is a transaction? Hard to say, right? And so hash has to work against that tide, right? And people have to be educated about the technical nuance. But then again, I think that's a good art piece then. An art piece that engages you in a way that makes you action in a way that a strictly commercial reason may not do. Right? People can go on Etherscan to go find arbitrage opportunities, but people who go on there just to find history, that's something that the only way you'll do it commercially is if I pay you like a contractor fee to do it. But yet we were able to do that with thousands of people through pure art form. And I think that's the power of artistry to an extent, is enabling experiences that aren't commercial. And I think that's what we're trying. That's why I like Mana so much right now. Is Mana just skirts that that gray area of like commerciality, but then also of artistry. Right. Like where it's not you can't dump Mana. That's just not something you could really beyond selling your token, your
Right.
NFT that carries it. So for me, and I know this is something that, I think everybody, Ash and I have different ways of interpreting this as art.
Yeah.
For me, I think why, for example, Proof of Beauty has done so many things historically driven, because it's a reflection that I personally have a love towards the very medium that the art is made.
Right.
Right. And I wanted to create art that is a homage to that medium. And that's just how I interpret artistry at this very moment. And a lot of my work in the future will continue to perceive around that theme, but maybe not as historically driven. Now, other ways can people like that's to me is just like a matter of interpretation. Like, what does art mean to you? What does performing art mean to you?
And
for
who's
me,
even? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, for me, it just means performing art with the medium you intend to perform with, right?
Right.
Like, if I want to do videography, which is something I've been learning on the side,
Yep.
that's a different domain space to me, in a sense that you gotta exercise that tool brush, in its ways, right? And NFTs are the same way. Like, we're gonna make NFTs that are not art unless they are an NFT. They're not finished without it being an NFT. Like, NFT is the best way to make this art and artwork. That's been a perspective I've held very strongly about how we do things here at the studio.
I think that your perspective, though, is going to be a lot more of the perspective that is held by like large corporations. Like, for example, you would think like if Disney were to be aggressively pursuing a creative expansion of the way it tells stories, it could use NFTs as the medium. But it's about the art itself. Did I lose you again? I may have lost Dave again, guys. Let's give him one moment here. But about 150 minutes into this conversation, if I lost Dave here, we might just call it. I will see where he's at with things on Discord. Yeah, it is interesting just to reflect on the various perceptions of what is art. And even just as a company to reflect on the balance between creating a solid business plan and creating art itself. Here we go. Dave's back.
Sorry again.
That's okay.
Struggling my Wi-Fi here.
It just gives me like a minute to like sit there and I'm kind of like, what do I do? Yeah, I'll just kind of say what I'm thinking. But yeah, it is. I was just kind of musing on the idea that so many businesses are probably going to be hard pressed using the NFT format to decide between creating art or creating a business. I really do think that NFTs, if you were to look at it simply as ownership, has an application in business, but when you look at it as a medium, in the same way that an IMG or a SVJ is a medium, it's a medium for art. Right.
It's a very performative medium and a medium that we just simply never were able to play with as an art form. And I think, because we work in crypto and everything's so commercial, nobody is willing to think in that way. And so, not to say that we were the first, because we were not the first and we're not the last. But I like to give us the cadence that like we have enough grit to make it who we are.
Right.
And like, again, like, to go back on like measuring success, right? It's like I look at like content creators now, like you could be like Logan Paul or KSI and have these, or BCQT or whatever, and have these very commercially successful YouTube channels, and they make you a lot of money. They're probably really, 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 really filthy rich, right? And
probably doing pretty good.
Really well in their positions. But then I don't look at, like, say, somebody making like a channel for, say, their art. Maybe they do painting and they do paint vlogs, or They just do ASMR style vlogging or like simple stuff that doesn't really make that much money, but maybe makes them enough or makes them enough to enable some amount of freedoms in their life.
What are your thoughts on like the Casey Neistat style vlog where it's almost commercial, but it's still
almost
vlog?
commercial. Yeah.
Yeah.
Personally, I never watched him. I never watched his
Mhm.
work, so I was never quite a big a fan of it.
Mhm.
Mixed feelings at best, but good on him for finding a way to commercialize it.
Yeah.
That's about it. But yeah, I think their balance can like. I do think the folks that can find that artistry commercial balance,
Mhm.
by what miracle or brilliance they found it, good on them. Because they don't come often, right? Like I feel like
You're
Nolan
right.
is one of those few guys got so freaking lucky.
You're so
But
right.
like
Yeah.
you could just make movies about how you think about time. Like it's like his movies, you watch them in sequence, they're just like a homage of how he
Right.
interprets reality as a person. And the
Oh,
ideas of time.
right. I actually watched Tenet with my dad, who
Yeah.
is dyslexic, like really dyslexic.
Yeah.
He was so confused, bro. I wanted to mention that. I mean, he still enjoed it. It was a good movie, but I think that at a certain point, he was kind of like,
I'm checked out from the plot.
yeah,
like-
yeah. Which timeline is he in? Is he backwards, forwards? My brain is flipping it, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, you're right though. Nolan is in quite a position to be able to make films like that.
And I think like Casey maybe is in that category where he may have found a way to commercialize his artistry in a way that is very financially incentive. But then again, this is where I fall. You don't fall into the survivor bias problem. Like
You're right.
they are success stories, but you don't really know what the full story was that brought them to where they are now.
Right.
You don't know who they really are, personality wise. It's like if you're going to use few variables to try to mimic their life, like maybe you can do it, but then again, how much of it was just luck and timing? And again, I think
just got me thinking it'd be like all the people who try to emulate things based on so few variables would be like, well, Elon Musk went to Queens and went to UPenn, so I'm going to try to go to Queens and transfer to UPenn, and maybe that will let me start a space company in Tesla. And you know what I mean?
Like the tech bro culture in Silicon Valley.
Yeah,
right? God, I absolutely hate it, and I know that, and I say that as somebody who's experienced it very vividly around me. And at times was one of those tech bros.
Yeah.
It's the life is about like survivor by signaling. It's like I wear a Patagucci. My company is in Y Combinator and or I raised money from this. Oh, last night, what did you do? Oh, I was at a VC dinner.
I went to a dinner
with other fellows trying to start a company and DeFi plus CFI plus whatever plus AI or whatever. It's like
yeah.
The fact that there's a parody show about it, I think, is more emblematic than anything else.
Yeah. There's actually quite a few good shows out there that kind of mimic this world. My favorite, though, is Silicon Valley. Do you like Silicon Valley?
I watch clips of it. As somebody who's grown up in it, I have a hard time wanting to watch what I see every day.
That's the beauty in it, though. Like they do such a good job catching the nuances of the different people I'm sure you've worked with.
Yeah.
Even myself, like I didn't work in the Valley, but I've had some exposure to tech. And they hit it on the nose. It's so funny.
I get that from the clips, and at some point, it's on the list to watch.
That's cool.
At some point, I have to get over my own grudges against my own childhood.
Yeah,
and just it's a fun show. Watch it for the funness of it.
It must be kind of surreal for you, having grown up in the Valley, to kind of see the Valley becoming what it is today. I mean, in the mind's eye, the Valley isn't very good today. Like the perception of what's happening in San Francisco is terrible. You know what I mean?
Well, when you grow up, the big thing about growing up is you don't really know the complexities of the world around you, right? For me, it was a safe place. It was a place where money wasn't a problem for nearly anybody I met. Right, everybody was working well, paid well. Our ambitions was going to a top university and then getting a CS degree and then coming back and making six figures. Right, like that was there was no fear that you're going to be below the poverty line. Like that would be a joke. And when I grew up, right, but like to an extent, it did create a worldview within here that failure is measured with, oh, I went to a community college, or I did that and did not go to Berkeley.
Right.
And at least from my growing up, or like, oh, I didn't found a company, or I don't work at a big five, and only work at a small startup, or I didn't get a stock payout and make mad
Right.
rich money. It's like, guys, you guys are like the richest area on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
Your problems are like minuscule compared to what most people have to experience on a day-to-day level. And I get it.
Right.
It's a reflection of cultural bubbles. That's not a fault of anybody individually.
Mm-hmm.
But it just creates like a very worldview that when I left to go to school, come back, I have every time struggled to want to readapt into, where money was so accessible that the problems just became less about the money and just became about how do you create a mythos around yourself that your money you're making is worth whatever you're doing, right? And
That makes so much sense. Yeah.
right, I think a lot of people when they join companies like, oh, I believe in this company. They always say that. That's always a narrative. But I'm going to be honest. I don't think most people go to work on this planet because I believe in the company. They go to a company because they need a job.
Yeah.
To make
Could you
ends
imagine,
meet, right?
like, if that's how we sought out work? We were just sitting there. We're like, what is my mission in life? Okay, what company in the world
Yeah.
also does this? You know, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's a privilege that the Silicon Valley can offer, which again is a incredibly valuable privilege. And I'm
Yeah.
sitting here standing to benefit from it because I got to be able to access that, unlike probably 6 to 7 billion people that couldn't access it. So I'm very privileged. I'm speaking from my ivory tower, from my perspective. But I think we need to take. But also, I find more problem with is the amount of damage that this could do if you use this thinking to see the world. And that's what I have my fault with the Silicon Valley a lot with is and we're even seeing this with some of the crypto companies that are backed by VCs. I really was unhappy when I saw Facebook do what they did, knowing what they did, know about their target demographics and what ad opportunities they seized from adolescents, from young people. I don't like how UX was designed around YouTube, around ads. I don't like how Uber and those charge those gazillion fees.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it's a reflection of Silicon Valley looking at the world and saying, you're just a number on a SQL data table to me. And saying, my job is to make that number go higher and I get a pay raise and my stocks gets more valuable.
Right.
And it's like that worldview is like, to me, it's like, that's not a mission in life. That's just you trying to justify making more money per click.
Yeah.
And I just find that to be so sucky of a way to live. And a lot of people do believe it. And I believed in it once at one point in my life, that innovation is always a good thing. But no, dark innovation happens every day in tech industries, right? Like, oh, let's figure out a way to make you stay longer.
I mean,
right?
Yeah, not even just tech. Like, I was thinking about like our energy resources, the way plastics are made, tobacco, like it goes on, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that really kind of broke the camel's back for me was before I was in crypto, I had quite a fondness to like Ubers and like the mobility movement of companies. But then I remember they're like, Lyft was like, well, they started doing a policy where they're like, hey, let's make you, like, you drove for 50 minutes, for example. They're like, hey, let's round it up to 60 minutes, an hour. Do 2 more rides for us and we'll pay you a little extra, right? But the problem to me was just like, well, this probably unintentionally can cause a lot more car accidents. What if the guy's just simply tired?
No doubt.
And he's just not in a place where he should be driving anymore safely on the road. Like, how many people probably just were affected indirectly? And this also sustains the burnout culture about
so right.
maximizing, right? And but like to this, I'm 100% certain some PMs out there got promoted because this maximized the reductionist perspective of making a user for numbers, right? And then the irony of it all to me is they make ads. And the ads are about humanity, about humans smiling and being happy in very gentrified areas of San Francisco or whatever.
I gotta send you something on that. Yeah.
it's like a night and day thing. You guys, this is not what you guys look at people internally. Like it and it's kind of frustrating, but then again,
I feel like
say that
it's
in crypto,
very true though.
Like in crypto we're not that much better, to be honest.
No.
But that's where I think I've personally found such a counter reaction that I wanted to do this whole studio thing. Where my hopefully my life is a lot more about storytelling, about artistry, about narrative driven. Oh my god.
So you'll have to watch this later, but this is a perfect example of what you were talking about. Like, let's create an ad that is emotionally connected to the core of who you are, so we can make money on you, right?
Oh, I have so much. I despise Facebook ads so much when I see them. Like, it's like, man, if you actually cared, like, why are you actively proposing very, very mentally unhealthy behavior in adolescent women or girls, right? Like,
so much up there.
There's like so many things. It's like, you guys know the problem,
or
or like Uber doing these things, or and then like, the amount of work they do with through SPACs, through evaluations. It's like, how much of this is like sheer trickery of like things, and like I'm like thinking here's like a software package to get hired at these companies right now. Whereas I'm saying this now because there's a crunch, like a kid out of college, you want to work in San Francisco, you gotta make at least like 120K minimum to like want to survive there, and then they have to offer you a juicy stock package, right? You add all of that together, it's like 200 to 300K a year per person. The only way that can exist is because VCs are willing to prop that up. That you give $3 million, you make that burn by hiring 5 people, $1.5 million a year, $2 million burn rate up the wazoo. Hopefully, you get a company going, right? To me, it's like that creates a narrative where everybody in college right now wants to get a computer science degree because it's really good money compared to Wall Street, where you got to work like banking hours or market hours. This is just like you work whenever you want, 9 to 5, whatever.
Yep.
And VCs are willing to kind of like subsidize you effectively.
Basically.
And this creates such a VC worship culture that I absolutely despise. I hate VC worship culture. I do know VCs that are really good at their job. But they don't have the right answer to anything as much as we do. They may have maybe a little bit more practiced with larger funds, but this created a problem where there's like kids out of college running like $50 million funds. It's like, kid, you don't even know how to manage $10,000 yet because you're just at the age, you're not mature enough.
Right.
How do you know anything about the world works? You weren't even there to experience the last few bubbles. Like
even. Sorry, I was just thinking on that note too, on like these firms that purportedly know how to manage all of these products and manage this money. I don't actually believe like a lot of them know what they're doing. I think they're figuring it out along the way. And you have this proof in the VR market where when virtual reality came out, everybody acted like for years we knew where VR was going.
Yeah.
VR products started coming along. Tons of money went into VR.
Moved in,
and 98% of it resulted in nothing.
Yep.
Right. And then you had the one company get purchased by Facebook, Oculus.
Yeah.
And so you really have nothing that came out of the VR market, even though at the time and for about 4 years, the VC community purportedly knew exactly what was happening in this market.
Yeah. And we're seeing that with the NFTs. We're seeing that with like a lot of the different kind of tech, like hard tech was one of them that I felt pretty frustrated about. It's I'm fine with VCs doing what VCs do because they are a very critical part of innovation.
Absolutely.
Just being that money. I don't like the worship that these guys know the right answer because they use other people's money to invest, and occasionally 1 in 100 companies to get a good returns on.
Right. Right.
They have just as much respect as I have as much respect. I have more respect to the actual like founders and people on the ground making it, because VCs, to me, like, this is me being very jaded, they spend all their time complaining and rationalizing why things work or don't work. Where sometimes the real problem is the complexities of the day to day. Like
Absolutely. Right.
and it just reductionistly looks at problems like, oh, it doesn't work because of this. Here's my thread of 10 points why. Yeah, I could pattern match Abraham Lincoln to the moon landing if I really wanted to, right? Like,
Oh man, there you're literally making me think of specific individuals in the VC community. I won't say names.
I won't say them either.
Yeah.
But it preys on the youth. It preys on wealth. People want to be wealthy. It preys on all of that stuff. And I think people who do it correctly can be wealthy. Not to say that's the case, but I feel like it's not a really a particularly productive expression of what we could be spending our brain cells on. And I feel like the smartest kids out of the best colleges.
Yeah.
If you were to ask them, I think statistically, a huge majority of them would say, "What's your future goal? To become a VC?" It's like, okay.
I think what they're really trying to say is they want to invest. They want to achieve a certain amount of success in their lives that enables them to invest in things they care about. But they don't really realize that's not necessarily what venture capital is, right?
Yeah. I think when they say it, right, as you kind of implied, they're saying like, I want to be a VC. Really, they're saying like, I want to be wealthy, powerful, and famous.
Pretty much what they're trying to say. Yeah.
And I get it. You know, when we're young, we don't really have an understanding how the world works, and we all probably had to have at some point share that belief, and that's what the world presses down upon us on our social media platforms. LinkedIn is really bad about that too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
And and I feel like Silicon Valley is the worst of it all. Like it makes people. It just feels like a lot of people are lying to themselves. Finding meaning in what really isn't meaning. And people in the Silicon Valley who maybe are not in crypto haven't really experienced what a bear market really feels like. Because VCs are so willing to prop up narratives within the world.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And I feel that's very annoying because it's like, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of table stakes.
Yeah.
You start a company, doesn't work, get Aqua hired. Doesn't work, go to Facebook, earn $300,000 or $500,000 a year as a senior or mid-level manager.
Yeah.
That's the worst, right? You could get. And then it creates this ego when the story is successful, where you're like, crap, I created the company and I sold it at 22. I am the smartest person on this world. You only had to convince one person, you had to convince 5 people that were smart. Who were they?
Right.
The other company, right?
Yeah.
You didn't have to convince anybody else that you got what was valuable. And sure, acquisitions are a very pivotal part of business growth. I don't negate that. That is a very big part of how a business can grow.
Absolutely.
But the amount of ego that Silicon Valley can give you.
I mean, you brought up a point earlier that touches on what you're saying. It's like people who say they're from YCOM, right?
Yes.
People want to be, I can name probably 15 amazing accelerators, including Station F in Paris, which I would argue is way better than Y Combinator. But let's go to Y Combinator because we know that's going to give us a status.
Let's give them 15% of our equity for what is it, 150K?
Right.
That's
oh god,
bargain basement deal in here.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's. And I say this as like, I probably am in a place of permission to say this because I don't run a venture capital backed business. I feel like if I were to go, because I am currently in the Bay right now, if I were to talk to some of the ex coworkers, by the principle that they have different incentive alignment, they were more willing to see the good in it than the bad. But like, I guess I'm more willing to see the bad in than the good. So call me jaded, as pretty much the TLDR with that statement. But I look at the whole Solana debacle of like Solana being pretty much like a barely functional blockchain.
Yeah.
But it's been hyped to the tits when it comes to its capabilities and its success. And when the TVL was so overinflated, it's just like that playbook being played in a very degenerate way of just like pretty much groupthink hyping.
It felt like a similar thing with even AVAX. Maybe I'm wrong though.
AVAX had a little bit of that too. I mean, like, I'm gonna be honest, Bored Apes has that problem.
Yeah.
God Lord, I hate talking to Bored Apes people.
Yeah.
It's like, congrats, you bought something and held on to it. Like it
yeah.
Right? Like I like
right.
Like there's some folks out there who are buying franchisee businesses and working hard for their cash flow. Congrats, you bought a ape at 0.1 ETH, and I say that I'm a Bored Ape holder, so like I'm faulting myself for the amount of accumulated wealth I've received from Yuga Labs. Right? That doesn't make you smart. That doesn't make you successful, right? Like I think like Naval had a good tweet. Not to say that I praise that guy in any way. He says some smart stuff every once in a while, but some stuff is fortune cookie shit.
I hear you. Yeah, we don't need to say more than that. You're so right. Yeah, fortune cookie shit isn't the way to put it.
There was a quote. He said like the worst thing you can do in life was like you were successful once because you're lucky.
Yeah.
And you thought that was because of your own wit. So you live your life with that assumption that you can repeat that success through wit. The best way to be successful is to be successful through your own wit because that's actually repeatable. Yeah. Something like that borderline, which I dissect the statement whatever you want, but I think that's what a lot of the Bored Apes people are doing. It's like, I bought a Bored Ape, successful.
Right. It's too bad too, because what this is going to do, maybe not always, but let's say in the scenario where you have somebody who bought a couple of apes and they were just like you or I, they minted a few NFTs and this one went up. They're going to think they have this thing that nobody else has, and they're going to propagate it as if they figured it out. And what happens when you have this happen in business is you have all of these people that go and they're basically like false influencers. Yeah. Right. Or like, what would you call that? I'm trying to remember the correct term here, but I mean, like, there's really no foundation to how these people operate. There's no business know-how behind that decision. They didn't buy a Bored Ape because they were smarter than you or I. They bought a Bored Ape because that's what they saw on Twitter to do.
Yeah. And then they start manifesting meaning to that purchase.
Right. And you even have it in as simple as like, oh, let me include in my bio Bored Ape number 4115 or whatever. Right. Because it's in my bio and I have this Bored Ape. That must mean that I've figured things out, guys. You should follow me. Right. You know?
Yeah. Which is like good on Bored Ape to capitalize on that freaking model.
In
like,
so many ways. Yeah.
But good on those guys to outwit us all to figure that one out. But yeah, like it's that kind of culture deteriorates and unmotivates, I think, the real work being done.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
These guys are capturing success in a way that makes the people who spend hours and hours crafting something not be able to share some of that attention, right? Which again, that's what social media is designed to do. It's not meant to have those kind of conversations. Like microblogging platform, no shit. It's those kind of stuff that succeeded.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I definitely had moments of just like serious frustration where I'm like, dude, I'll be sitting there, I'll be like, man, I worked 6 weeks, 60 hours to get to here. And you're telling me they created an ERC20 token called ApeCoin. And it just like chose an arbitrary number to give to you.
Yeah.
And my 60-hour weeks there's nothing I could do more than
What you did. Yeah.
yeah, and like it's like I got nothing more to exert, and
Yeah.
I mean I don't say it as if like I'm trying to say I'm giving up. No, because again, you got to outlive those motherfuckers.
Yep.
But two, it's like it sucks. It does suck when hard work isn't appreciated. But then again, I don't think that's a reflection of just crypto. I think that's how the real world works. Sometimes hard work is just simply not appreciated.
You're probably right about that. I think more times than not, it's not appreciated.
But yeah, but then like in crypto, we move so fast. It's like you live and learn, right?
True.
It's like a hyperbolic chamber of life lessons. That's what crypto means to me.
That this 3-hour pod can be summarized in that crypto is
Yeah.
a hyperbolic chamber of life lessons.
Lessons. Yeah, every bull market, bear market teaches something. But all right, let's 3 hours, and I got lunch to catch too.
Yeah.
Well,
it was a good conversation, Dave.
Lunch, whatever, yeah.
Yeah. What is it?
Yeah.
Well, it's getting late now, but
Yeah.
well, to all those who tuned in today, thank you so much for tuning into the Proof of Beauty podcast. We sure have a good time just getting together, and we call it our happy hour because we genuinely enjoy just like shooting the shit and chatting about things that are on our minds, things we care about, studio related or not. I do find that even when it seems to be more creative, however, that the conversation is still very much in alignment with the type of thinking and work we do. Right. And so to the listener, when we're sitting around chatting about tenant repeatedly, it might seem, or they might miss the importance in what we're talking about if they aren't able to see it from our perspective. But from the studio's perspective, these creative works are very much in alignment with the way I know that Dave and Ash see themselves creating things and the way I'd love to create things as well. Focusing first on the artistry before the commercialization, right?
And I think people will get it from our podcast that we're almost counter culture to a fault sometimes. We just don't want to subscribe almost by our own wantingness to be always the ones on the pirate ship.
Yeah.
And that's, I think a lot of our work reflects that energy.
Right.
The podcast reflects that. We're always like, we always want to pick that fight, which sometimes is good, sometimes is bad. Yeah.
Well, right on. Well, if anybody new is listening, you can find us on Discord, discord.gg/POB. Jump in, check us out. You can also follow us on Twitter, Proof Beauty, PRRF Beauty. Jump in, say hi, ask your questions, whatever it is. We'll be sure to see if we can get back to you and address your concerns or whatever it is. But with that, I guess we'll end it off here, Dave.
Yep, that sounds good.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for listening, guys. Everybody have a great weekend.